I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. I've seen the sun hang like a flame in the sky. Yes, I've seen the sun turn, and I've seen the sun die. And I often think now, before our time is run, will there be any thoughts for what we have done? Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine.
Most pulpits are occupied by good men who are telling people to be good, and then they'll have a chance of heaven. But you know, the real gospel's not that. The gospel is for sinners. You don't have to be good to be saved. You do have to be saved to be good. And whosoever will may come, and all manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men. It's not who you are, it's whose you are. And you can come just as you are. He won't leave us just as we are. We don't have to worry about what God thinks of us. Only what he thinks of Christ, our substitute.
Don't fall for the trap that people set up when they say it's not possible to keep the commandments.
He's got it.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest back again is Brian Neumann. Great to have you here, Brian.
Great to be with you again. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
I really enjoyed our conversation last time. It's had lots of views, but now we've got new technology since then, and we're broadcasting to Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and a couple of different places on Facebook. And so I think we're going to be able to share this content to an even broader audience this time. So welcome everyone that is watching. Just a quick thing, if you are watching from YouTube, please shoot me a quick message. I'm just checking if my chat option here is working. And those watching on our Facebook group, if you could just send me a little comment, I want to check that it's working from there as well. And if you are watching on Facebook and you'd like to get involved with the conversation, you need to go over to the Facebook page and watch over there. You can write from there and it'll come direct onto my my software here, and I can bring it onto the screen. If you write from the Facebook group, I can only read it out loud, but I've got a monitor here, I'm watching it, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments as well. Oh, good. It looks like our YouTube is working. That's fantastic. Good to see Chris Lucas, the Protestant, who, hey, Chris, why don't you come on the show tomorrow? I've had to move my tomorrow's guest to next week. So shoot me an email, Chris, and see if we can get you on this time tomorrow. Okay, John Davidson is watching as well. And let's get right into it. So this book here, The White Elephant, Brian S. Neumann. This book is a fantastic read. A friend of mine put me onto it. She said, you have got to read this book. And I had a little bit of trouble with trying to download it online. That seems to be all resolved, everyone. I'm going to bring the link up in a minute. And she loaned me her copy, and I read it, and I read it a couple of times. One of the things I really like about it, Brian, is you're going to source material. You're not going, she said, he said. You're going back to the source, and I really appreciate when authors do that. So we then did our interview and had a great conversation about the book and all things Ellen White, because the title, the White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. I think I've gotten that right. It is an interesting topic because some people say, oh, why do you keep talking about Ellen White and this and that? And well, I think it's because the church itself hasn't really addressed successfully answering some of the critiques that have been raised. They tend to, attack the player, not the ball. And I listened to a podcast the other day, and for an hour and a half, this Adventist apologist, all he did was criticize the critics and character assassinated them. There was zero content where he refuted the claims. So those that desire for this conversation to go away, the big white elephant's in the room because no one's actually addressing it at an official capacity from the Adventist Church. They seem to try occasionally. Anyway, let's kick off with I was just going to say, then you after our interview, you sent me my own signed copy, so that's what I've got here, and thank you. So let's start the ball rolling with, have you found that your critics have tended to try and besmirch your name instead of refuting the content?
Yes, they have. I think, just like you were saying, the majority of people do try and attack the player instead of the ball. And I've had that, particularly when I was promoting my book on Facebook, and I have a lot of Facebook followers. People try to attack me, a lot of them because I left the church, and anything they can find about you or failings. I mean, we all have failings, but they will try and point that out instead of saying, here's the quote that you quoted, or here's the statement you made. Here is the absolute evidence that refutes what you're saying. And there have been attempts now and then, but I've yet to find a successful refutation truly successful refutation of the evidence presented in The White Elephant. It's pretty much the kind of thing that you've been saying. It's people kind of skirt around the issue and try, and there's some typical Adventist arguments that come from authors that have written books to try and explain why the critics are wrong. And people often quote those typical quotes, but they are in most cases redundant when you dig deeper and come out with the absolute evidence.
Yeah, and I think they love the ad hominem attack because it works. it tends to shut the conversation down.
That doesn't bother me anymore. But
No,
yeah,
no. Same here. And I think the great thing with social media is that they can't shut down the conversation. And the thing
right.
I value about this particular community we're building here, and we had a very interesting conversation the other day with an Australian guy. He was a Qantas pilot called Graham Hood. And I just want to say thank you to the audience that watched, because he was kind of an anti-vaxxer person, and I want to interview people on all sides of it. Next week, we're going to talk to some people that definitely support the vaccination and everything that went down. He was the opposite to that, but everyone was very civil in the conversation. So I think what we're trying to do here at SDAQ&A is have these conversations that can be difficult, but get to the content and talk about, well, we disagree, we agree. How can we, chat about the claims that have been made? Can we live with them? So perhaps share us a little bit about what motivated you to write the book in the first place, and tell us a bit about your Adventist journey.
Yeah, my Adventist journey goes right back from when I was born, because my parents were Adventist missionaries. We fourth generation Adventists. They were missionaries in Africa. I was born into that sort of environment. I grew up as an Adventist. Attended Adventist schools, and so pretty much ingrained in me from childhood was the whole Adventist theology, the teachings. Of course, Ellen White went along with that as well. And I kind of became a pretty rebellious young guy, and ended up getting into music very strongly, which of course was a good thing, but I wanted to be a rock and roll musician. And so at my late teens, I pretty much gave up anything that had to do with Adventism, left the church, and went into the rock music industry. Was in that industry for years in South Africa and Europe, and as a professional musician. And then had a number of bad experiences related to drugs and things like that, nearly dying of a drug overdose. And at some point in your life, when you have those kinds of things, you start thinking about the direction your life's taking. And anyway, many years later, probably about 16 years later, in my 30s, I kind of gave up the rock and roll music lifestyle, and gave my life to Christ. And I guess it was sort of a natural thing, because my mom was still an Adventist church worker. I was always reading books, even during those years, on Bible prophecy. My mother regularly used to send me books while I was in Europe, and I was always interested in it, and it was almost a natural progression from where I was at, based on the decisions I was making with my life, to go back to the Adventist church. And I did experiment with a lot of things. I experimented with the occult during those years, and various other kinds of religious philosophies. But I went back to the Adventist church because there was, I have to say this, because obviously we're going to get into a topic that kind of in some ways is critical of some Adventist teachings and things, but at the very core, I wanted Jesus in my life, and I wanted to change where I was at. And the Adventist church certainly did offer that. And due to my deep interest in Bible prophecy and my belief, as it still stands today, that this world cannot carry on the way that it is, and that Christ is going to come soon, I gave my life to Christ, and then came back to the church. And then got involved in ministry after a very short period in the church. Started off with a music ministry that really had to do with lecturing on the language of music, more of a musicological view of music, how it affects us. And so I did a lot of study into that, and of course studied theology as well. And then finally went into ministry, and so spent the rest of my life in the church at that time, the period that I was there, affiliated with Amazing Discoveries, which is a ministry I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, and traveled around the world lecturing and doing that. And then probably around about 2008, 2009, there were experiences that happened to me in my life. I also was questioning certain things with and by that time I'd become a very powerful defender of Ellen White. So I was a strong apologist for Ellen White. And I had many debates with many of the Bible scholars, Adventist theologians about Ellen White. Surprisingly enough, many of the Bible scholars were not such great defenders of Ellen White. More so, they were generally trying to find reasons why we didn't have to listen to this or that she had to say, which I found kind of astounding, especially from where I'd come from. And but just to put the picture where it was at that time, I was such a strong defender of Ellen White that most scholars who argued with me while I was defending her could not give me answers to the defenses I gave. So in other words, it was not for lack of knowledge of Ellen White, what she was about, and understanding it from within the context of the Adventist paradigm and why they believe in Ellen White. It was not for lack of having that knowledge that I found myself rejecting Ellen White. It was because of discoveries that I made in my studies to try and vindicate Ellen White more and more, that I discovered there were certain things you just simply could not vindicate, you simply could not explain, and some things that were absolutely blatantly contrary to what Scripture taught. And based on my belief that the Bible and the Bible alone is the basis for our belief, which Adventists, of course, claim as well, the Bible, sola scriptura, the Bible alone, I said, hang on a moment. If you have a prophet that you are saying agrees with Scripture, yet you are finding so many things that this prophet is saying that does not agree with Scripture, then who are you going to go with? Are you going to continue to try and find some sort of argument of justification or some sort of way to make it fit? Or are you going to say, you know what, I'm going with the Bible and that's where I'm at? And so I eventually reached that point where I said, I'm done. I'm going with the Scripture. And that's what finally led to me saying there are a lot of other people there who need to know the truth about these things. And myself and Cami, my wife, we decided, let's start doing some serious study. We spoke to the pastors in the church we were with at the time. And lo and behold, we had a meeting with them and they didn't agree with Ellen White themselves, even though they were promoting her, so to speak, in the church, but subtly trying to sideline her and not tell too many people about Ellen White. And, often evangelistic meetings, well, let's hide Ellen White away, get the people in the church, and then slowly but surely we'll kind of introduce them to this voice in Adventism, but it's more of a historical thing. We don't have to take it too seriously. So those are the kinds of issues we were confronting until eventually we had to leave the church and say, you know what, if we're going to have the Bible and the Bible alone, and even the people who are leaders in the church are not actually believers of Ellen White really in the true sense of the word themselves, then there's something that is very wrong and it needs to be addressed. And that's what finally led to the writing of The White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. So it's a long story.
No, it's a great story. I love it. It's interesting. I think I think there's a video of you on an Amazing Discoveries program where you're definitely defending the faith and Ellen White. And I remember watching that before our last interview. And it's interesting when you then say in exploring ways to defend her, you kind of went, hang on a second, there's something wrong here. When who's the Amazing Discoveries big main kind of guy again?
Well, the main speaker for Amazing Discoveries is Walter Veit, Professor
That's
Walter
right.
Veit.
That's right, Walter Veit. Yeah. And one of the things I like about people like Dennis Priebe and Walter Veit and Ted Wilson is that they do speak clearly about what they believe. I've got this kind of theory in motion where there's two churches in one within Adventism, and there's plenty of times where these two kind of collided. 1888, 1919, 1957, Des Ford in 1980. I think around 1980 there was a bit of a behind-the-scenes split that no one seems to want to admit. Whereas the Dennis Priebes, the Ted Wilsons, the Walter Veits,
Walter Ray, and then the Walter Ray era was around.
That's right. So these guys all they see the two churches and they want the more liberal progressives out. The liberal progressives try and claim that they've got the right kind of Adventism, and these guys are just the lunatic fringe, which one Adventist I think, high up level leader back in the early 60s actually called the fundamentalist traditional Adventists. So when I try and tease apart these two movements in the one umbrella, I think they'd be best to tease themselves apart so they can get out of each other's hair and have a more effective ministry. But the difference I see is that the more progressive Adventists, what I call the gospel Adventists, they do uphold the 28 fundamentals, the baptismal vows, and they don't really have Ellen White as much in the picture. The more traditional conservative Adventists, they have Ellen White front, she's driving the bus kind of thing. Yeah. So when you came to that point where you were thinking, you know what, I'm starting to question Ellen White, why didn't you just slip into a more progressive style Adventist? There's churches you can go to that are more progressive, and put Ellen White way at the back and focus on the 28 fundamentals and caring for the community. What was it that made you go, I can't just step into this gospel Adventist kind of warm fuzzy bubble over here, I've got to leave? What made you just get right out of it altogether?
Okay, that's a very simple thing to answer, and I'll tell you why. Because at its very core, what the warm, fuzzy bubble gospel Adventists are doing, to coin your phrase there, what they're doing is dishonest. Okay, and even the 28 fundamental beliefs themselves, even which they do still believe, as you said, there are problems with those too. So the problem there is that there are so many in that sphere of Adventism who are, on the one hand, promoting the 28 fundamental beliefs, and I must say there are plenty of biblical ones too that you can support with the Bible. But on the other hand, the whole thing of we are the Adventist church, because they still believe that they are God's remnant. They still believe that they are the church with the truth for the end of time, except what they will do is they'll say all of our fundamental beliefs are based on the Bible and the Bible alone. So, but yet when you start digging in, is particularly the sanctuary doctrine and a few others, but when you start digging into those doctrines and you start talking about the origins and you start taking them apart and saying, well, what exactly does the sanctuary doctrine mean? Then you start finding that there are things they don't really want to tell you about the sanctuary doctrine, because they get into trouble when they start doing that. Because eventually, if somebody's going to say, well, where did this doctrine come from? Because you're the only church in the world that actually has this sanctuary doctrine, this 2,200-day interpretation and the cleansing of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment. Where do these come from? The Bible. Okay, show me in the Bible. And there are scriptures they will refer to, but where are the origins? So somewhere along the line, you've got to get into the history, and then you start ending up with William Miller and Hiram Edson and Ellen White and all these things. And then more questions come until eventually you find out that I've got to try and hide some things here, because if I start telling the truth about what really it was believed by the Adventist pioneers about this doctrine, then this is going to turn this person off. So there's a level of dishonesty in what they are doing, because they are hiding a lot of what true Adventism is about, because they don't want people to know it. And I'll tell you this much as well, actually, is that if you want to be a Seventh-day Adventist, according to real, and this was my argument when I defended Ellen White, by the way. So when I was an apologist for Ellen White, and I would challenge the ministers or the Bible scholars or people in the church with regards to Ellen White, I would say, look, you claim you're a Seventh-day Adventist, so you're a leader in the church, or you whatever, you believe in Adventist doctrine and belief. So the real true Adventists, quite frankly, are the Adventists that are kind of on the lunatic fringe, if you want to call it that, because they are the ones who are following what the pioneers did. Exactly. So they're wrong. Exactly. Which we discovered. But they are the ones, if you want to define who the true Adventists are, they are the true Adventists. They are the ones, places like Wildwood. I spent a year in Wildwood down south in Georgia training, and they believe that they are the remnant of the remnant. They believe that mainstream Adventist church is in apostasy, and that when it comes to giving the final message to the world as Seventh-day Adventists, the rest of the Adventist church, the mainstream church, will fall off. They'll fall away based on clear statements by Ellen White, by the way, where she makes it very clear that it will be the mainstream church that will fall. There will be this remnant that stays behind, and then they will be the ones who will go out and do the final proclamation before Jesus returns at the end of time. So they are honest, but they misled and they're wrong. Whereas the mainstream church, who are the gospel Adventists, there's a level of dishonesty because they are denying something about their origins, and they are hiding it from the people because they know that if we tell things the way that they really are, people are not going to be flowing into the church the way they are, and there are going to be a lot of worried brothers and sisters in the church scratching their heads and saying, I didn't actually know that. What the heck's this all about? So that's my
and I think there's almost a level of denial amongst the progressive Adventists, and I get a lot of pushback. I did a program recently where I said Ted Wilson is a real Adventist, and everyone was like, whoa, hang on, we're real Adventists as well. We don't have to agree with him. We don't have to always have Ellen White. If Ellen White says it and the Bible doesn't, we go with the Bible. And that's your first level of going, okay, well, let's settle into this. And of course, you're an Adventist and we can have this view and we don't have to agree with Ellen. But when you dig deeper into every single Adventist main pillar, it's not only not based on the Bible, it's anti-gospel. It's in direct opposition to the gospel. So you can go away with your warm fuzzy bubble that we talked about and be a progressive Adventist and find gospel Adventism within the church and find your local church, but you have to at some point go, I'll do that, but really I'm a cultural Adventist and I enjoy taking a bit of the Sabbath, but it's not necessarily for salvation. I enjoy the diet and the health movement, but let's not look too closely at why Kellogg and Ellen began the health doctrine.
Right.
I believe that there's a judgment, but let's not go too closely in the investigative judgment and the way it outlines, because perhaps that's wrong. And so they end up kind of hobbling themselves by always having to double guess and justify and move themselves away from certain positions. I watched an interesting interview with Stephen Beagles and Miles Christian on his show Answering Adventism. And Stephen often watches the show, almost every show Stephen's watching, and he's a real gospel Adventist. He's got, in fact, I was going to give him a bit of a plug, but I don't have it here. He runs a YouTube program, Gospel Adventist, a blog, all sorts of stuff. But as I was listening to Miles pressuring him to answer some of these key pillar things and how he kind of disagreed with them, but was still an Adventist because he's going to go to the Bible instead of Ellen White's interpretation, I felt like he was almost not realizing that he's not an Adventist.
You've departed so far from what the original concept is that you might as well not be something else, or not be. This is the interesting thing, is that it seems to be this constant state of denial that you're in when you're in that kind of situation, because there's some things you have to deny, and yet at the same time you want to be it. And this is the problem with it. And I'll tell you now why I say this. Adventism sells itself. In fact, there's an amazing quote, and I'm just going to quote it for you anyway, because it was a quote that was made by Ted Wilson, interestingly enough. And it was in 2014 at the annual council in Silver Springs, Maryland. And he made this interesting statement. Let me just read it for you. It fits perfectly. And then I'll explain why. As Seventh-day Adventists at the 2014 annual council, we affirm without hesitation that God has given us a special mission for these closing hours of Earth's history, and the devil is furious. The prophetic movement, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, described in Revelation 12, verse 17, as God's remnant people who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, is, and there's the important part, constituted in only one body of faith today, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, so there's the problem. When you join a denomination or a church and you are sold that line, that you have now become the only body in the world that represents this special chosen group of people, it is very hard when you have given into that and you've accepted it with all your heart, which I did, which my wife did, which so many people do. And I'm sure at one point maybe you did too.
Yeah.
To say, I'm leaving this now. What happens? I'm leaving the people who have the truth. And that's the problem. So what you do is, I can't do that. I want to stay, and I want to, I know that there's a problem with this statement or that thing by Ellen White, but I can't leave this only true body of faith, because there's enough scripture as far as I can see that says this really is the body of Christ. And that's where the problem lies. You have millions, perhaps, of Adventists who are in the church who are too scared to take a second look, to step back, to maybe step out of the bubble and say, let me take a brand new perspective.
Yes.
Look what is happening here, and why do I have to stay? Because here's another question, which is people often don't ask, and the question is this: are we saved by denominational affiliation? Are you saved because you're affiliated with any denomination, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Methodist, whether you're Lutheran, whether you're Baptist, whether you're, and there are hundreds of different Christian denominations, by the way. You are not saved by denominational affiliation. And that's the other problem with Adventism, because people get so scared that if I leave this denomination, I might not be saved. You are saved by only one thing. There's only one. The Bible is clear on this. There's no way anybody can argue till they're blue in the face. You are saved through Jesus Christ and Christ alone. You are saved through a person, not through your denomination or your church or anything else. And so that is the thing that Adventists need to start realizing, is that we are not saved because we believe in the sanctuary doctrine or because we believe in all these peculiar things that the Adventist church teaches. We are saved on the basis of the simplicity of the gospel itself, and that is founded in the person of Jesus Christ. Period. There is no other way to be saved other than by the Son.
And it's so interesting. We're on, as you were reading out that statement that Ted Wilson made, affirming essentially the remnant nature of Adventism. I'd brought up onto the screen the what do they call it? The baptismal vows that you sign when you get baptized in the Adventist church. And at that exact time that you were reading that out, I was about to introduce the same concept in writing, the baptismal vow, which says, do you believe that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the remnant church of Bible prophecy, and that people of every nation, race, and language are invited and accepted into its fellowship? So if you're an Adventist and you've been baptized, you have agreed to take on board, not that we hey, there's lots of people who are a part of the remnant, and the Adventist church is part of the remnant, and so are other people, good people in the Baptist church and other churches. This statement is not, this vow is not saying that. The vow is saying, do you believe that the Seventh-day Adventist church is the remnant church of Bible prophecy, and that other people of every nation, race, and language are invited and accepted into this fellowship here? When I watched the Miles Christian and Stephen Beagles, and good on you, Stephen, by the way, there's not a criticism. He's standing up for this gospel Adventism and trying to define it. But he was the one that mentioned, I believe, in the baptismal vows and the 28 fundamentals. But as you said, when you look deeper into the actual vows, the actual fundamentals, there's warts in there as well. So when you wrote your book, let's give it another plug here. I'm going to bring it up onto the screen in a minute where people can buy it on Amazon. Did you find a way to answer the progressive Adventist that says to you, well, I do follow Jesus. Jesus is my only thing I focus on. Jesus, atonement at the cross. I'm an Adventist, but Jesus first. What do you say that to them that challenges them to go, okay, you are focusing on Jesus, but you've got this big, massive flashing light that is saying you're attached to a denomination that believes it is the remnant, that believes it has the spirit of prophecy and Ellen White, that believes in the sanctuary doctrine, that has an incorrect view of the Trinity, that calls Satan the scapegoat, that believes at the end of time God is vindicated, that the atonement was at the cross, but hey, not quite completed at the cross. So while you might focus on Jesus, all this other stuff behind you is flashing to everyone that sees you. So in
Right.
your writing of the book, how would you perhaps answer those people, the progressives, that say, hey, I do focus on Jesus?
So one of the things I do in the book is I do not challenge people to leave the Adventist church. And I think while I say what I do about denominations and salvation, that's not the basis for your salvation, I also say that, some people want to be part of a church, and that's their decision, a personal choice and decision to make. But you have to realize, and this is the part that we, both myself and Cami, challenge people with, you have to realize when you're in a church, at some point, in fact, probably on a Sabbath to Sabbath basis, if you're in the Adventist church, if you are not in agreement with so many things that church is teaching, you are going to be in a Bible study group or whatever, and you're going to have to come up against things that you're going to say, I don't agree with that. It's Adventist, it's clear. It's and if you believe in Ellen White, it's based on Ellen White. That's absolutely clear, but it's not scriptural, and I don't agree with that. So for me personally, it came to the point where I said, you know what, I can't be in a situation where I am always arguing against somebody who is trying to defend the indefensible and coming up with all these weird arguments to try and defend why this is so. So for me personally, I had to leave. So my statement to people with regards to a choice about leaving a denomination is, if you don't want to leave, don't leave. But bear in mind that there will come a time, if you are really firmly based on the Bible and the Bible alone, where you're going to have to ask yourself the question, am I really gaining something remaining in this situation? But that happens in time. Not everybody gets there.
Yeah.
And if you're happy, I call it treading water in the Adventist church, and dealing with those things, even though they're not right, well, that's up to you, because some people actually go to church just for the fellowship, even though they don't agree with a lot of things. They want to feel they're part of a group. They want to feel they're part of this, and so people have different reasons. But if your reasons are really truly based on, I want the correct theology, I want to really know why I believe what I believe, and I want to be able to talk with people who are going to be constructive in this sort of debate that we're having, then I can't remain in that sort of environment. And some people don't have that reason for going to church. It's more of, I don't want to use the word club, but sometimes it is even that, like they don't want to leave the club. And as I mentioned before, part of it is to do with the fact that if you're in the only remnant that there is, well, if you leave that, you're done,
Yeah, there's some hidden things that are binding them still. There's some ties that bind. During my program where I said Ted Wilson is a real Seventh-day Adventist, someone wrote to me and said, why is your experience a justification to cast judgment on all of us who have not had your experience? And I think what you and I have just said there is, we're not trying to judge whether people stay or not, but we are commenting on whether they stay or not, in a sense of, let's ask some questions. So what gives me justification to discuss these things and ask why is that I, like you, fifth generation Adventist, didn't leave till I was in my 50s. The experience I had gives me the right to draw conclusions for myself and decide whether I leave or stay. And I left.
Right.
So these are not judgments. They're just challenging questions.
Yes.
And there's something within Adventism that is not benign. It's not like your local Anglican church that has a high church and a low church, or Baptists that have different kind of communities. A Baptist can move to another town and go to a Episcopalian church. They're not they're kind of a benign Christian gospel focused religions, quirky, flawed, left and right as far as standards go, swinging, whatever. But Adventism has a unique kind of gospel that we're challenging people who claim to be Adventists, that they might want to just take a second look at it. It's not people like Stephen Beagles who have decided, no, I'm an Adventist, I'm a gospel Adventist, I'm staying, I love it, I love my fellowship with my group. I go, great, because why? Because you've thought about it. You've come to your own conclusions. These are just stimulating conversations. They're not casting judgment.
Yeah, in fact, I'll say this much, and that is that, and referring back to what I said earlier, there are hundreds of different Christian denominations. There are a few of them that stand out, like Adventists, who claim to have, like Jehovah's Witnesses might be another one who really feel that, if you're not part of us, you're not saved. Adventists kind of have that position. The Catholic Church feels that it's the mother of all churches, and that if there are a few different churches in Adventism, in the Christian world, that have that sort of opinion about themselves, Adventists being one of them. But I will say this, that I think we will all be shocked when Christ comes and we look at those who are saved, that there will be people saved from every single denomination in Christianity around the world. Not because they were in that particular denomination, not because they happen to be a Jehovah's Witness or even a Mormon or an Adventist or a Catholic, for whatever it might be. We're going to be surprised. They're all going to be there. But the reason why they're going to be there is not because of the denomination. In spite of the denomination they were in, they are saved. Because the fundamental thing, look, nobody agrees on every single aspect of theology or doctrinal belief or whatever it might be. We all, even within denominations, they don't agree.
Yeah.
In the Adventist Church, there is so much disagreement on fundamental teachings that are to be Adventist. So you are not going to be saved. The one thing that is going to save you is that which is at the core of the gospel, and that is Jesus Christ. You can be a Catholic and you can be wrong on a whole lot of things. You might be wrong on end-time prophecy. You might be wrong about a whole lot of things. But if you are truly in love with Jesus and you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, that is what is going to save you. God's not going to look at you and say, you know what, you had the wrong idea about baptism. I'm sorry, buddy, you're out. But I loved you. I really sought you with all my heart. No, sorry, your idea of baptism was wrong. And by the way, you didn't keep the seventh-day Sabbath either. And so you're out of the door too. And there's this belief that is not what is going to save people. That is why out of all the people in the world, I believe, of these groups, Adventists are going to be the most shocked out of everybody to see you actually in heaven, because there are people that are going to be there not because of their religion. And Adventists, there are going to be many Adventists that are saved. And if you're there and you're in love with Jesus and you want to stay in that church, by all means. So you're right. I'm not trying to discourage people in that regard, but bear in mind that when you are saved one day, it's going to be in spite of the church you belong to.
Yeah. I like that. Rick has made an interesting comment that I'm interested in your thoughts here. People are afraid of not finding a Sabbath-keeping church that does not believe in eternal torment. I'll just quickly, before you give a thought there, just reminded me of when I was chatting to Miles Christian in an interview we did here, and a shout out to Miles if he's watching. I encourage everyone to go and check out his channel, Answering Adventism. We were discussing a bit because people in the comments were pushing back on him. He's a former Adventist. He didn't outright say, but I think he would definitely hold the view of a literal hell. But as we were discussing it, he was highlighting that is not a salvational issue, whether you believe it or not. And I think in an additional comment to that, I ran into some people the other day at the local cafe. I love cafe culture. And they were saying they're what I'd call fringe Adventists, but want to kind of stay. But they're also fellowshipping at a local Sunday church. And they said it's so refreshing to go there and just hear the gospel every week. And I thought, I didn't push them to say that, but it's just interesting that they would use the word refreshing and to find a place that preaches the gospel. And they don't agree with everything that's presented there, but they just felt like, it was like hopping into a warm bath.
Right.
And so, one of the things that you can challenge people who have found we say niche, some people say niche, within the Adventist church and enjoy their local church and love it and never want to leave. It's still interesting for them to go at least, hey, let me just at least allow myself to be challenged. Why am I doing that instead of just doing it? So what are your thoughts there on Rick's comment where people are afraid of not being able to find a Sabbath-keeping church and the torment of hell?
Well, you could join the Church of God Seventhday. That's not a promotion.
No, you and I are on the same wavelength today. I was literally about to say Church of God Seventhday.
Yeah. So, we attended that church for a while. In fact, a lot of my research I got from one of the brethren of the church, Robert Coulter, who was an author for the church. He's one of their main historians. And through him, I studied the history of the Church of God Seventhday, because they came out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So most of their beliefs are very similar to Adventism, except they don't at all have Ellen White in their teachings, and there's a reason for that and a good reason for it. And they have the same beliefs as far as eternal hellfire is concerned, and that. There are very few, unfortunately, churches in Christianity that have that view that Adventists and Church of God Seventhday have regarding eternal hellfire. But I will say this much: if you've got a problem with eternal hellfire, with being in a church that believes in it, you are going to find it very difficult to find a church that is Sabbath keeping and doesn't that I'd say the only option, like, there are a few branches of Church of God Seventh-day. There's the Seventh-day Church of God, I think, is another branch, which is a kind of a spin-off of that. There are a few of them, so you might want to do that. But by the same token, based on what I was saying earlier, is you don't have to be in a church that doesn't believe in eternal hellfire to have good fellowship. I mean, a lot of Sunday keeping churches, of course, believe in that. Baptists are very strong on the eternal hellfire and all that. But there's some very beautiful things that I've heard in sermons in Baptist churches that I can say amen to. And yes, when the eternal hellfire part comes up, I kind of say, okay, well, that part I'm not too keen on. But you know what? If I go to the Adventist church, I can say, great, I'm good on the eternal hellfire thing that you guys are teaching, but there's about 20 other things here that I don't believe in that you're talking about. So you've got to give and take. If you really want to be part of a denomination or a church, you've got to say, I'm happy to go. There are going to be things I'm not going to agree with, but I'm having a good experience because there's a lot that I do enjoy, if that is what you choose,
Yeah. In many ways, it's just a matter of admitting that instead of denying it and trying to make all the round pegs fit in the square spaces, just admitting it and going, yeah, I can't answer that, but I do love staying in, and that's what. Can you share? Can we pivot a little bit to? I just want to finish on those the baptismal vows. As I read, I think there's 13 of them. There were several that, even with the watered down version that we have now as compared to what was 50, 60 years ago, there was some pretty interesting and subtle legalistic terminologies even in those that I would challenge any progressive Adventist to stand up and say, yes, I would like to re-sign these and publicly declare my support of these 13 vows. I don't know how many progressive Adventists would be willing to do that publicly. I've just noticed Rick has just done a little addition to what he said before. I'm speaking of when people are thinking of leaving. They fear key doctrinal differences. They fear not finding a fit, and that's very true, Rick. I think people truly desire to feel like they belong somewhere. This couple that I ran into the other day ended on the note when we said our farewells that they wish they could find somewhere where people that had an Adventist kind of view could gather together and just feel a sense of camaraderie, but not be Adventist anymore. So I think Rick's raising a good point there. There's a fear of not fitting in. So it's not even about the doctrine or whether you leave or not. It's just this, will I just float endlessly? So how did you find a place to fit in after you left?
Yeah. Well, we attended Church of God Seventhday was one of them. We attended a number of different churches. We attended Baptist churches. We attended trying to think of Seventh-day Baptist Church we attended, and we were kind of attending churches that I was kind of a musician playing in different churches, helping them out with their musical ministry. So I was helping out trying to think of the denomination it was, the Church of the Nazarene, and we had some great messages there too, but I was really there just as a musician helping them out. But still, we used to go to the services, and so we tried a number of different things. Right now, we are not affiliated with any denomination, so more often than not, we kind of and I preach in other churches as well. At Papa D's church, what was that? So I'm asking my wife a question. What church does he do? Yeah, congregational church,
Yeah.
we attended those as well. And that was also because I preached there often. So we kind of have been moving around, quite
Yeah.
frankly. And sometimes we don't. We have our family church at home
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And
I'm the same.
that's kind of where we're at, because we can talk about the things and read about the things and confirm things from Scripture and really have a debate and discussion amongst ourselves and know that we are in agreement without having to go somewhere and feel like I don't want to get into a debate with this person even though they're wrong. But yet we do enjoy going to other churches as well, but not any specific one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to pivot now to your research on Ellen G. White, but just before I do, I've just noticed another comment. This is from Kimberly McDougall. I've read through the White Elephant book and gone through any tricky parts with original Hebrew, etc., looking at the arguments from only the Bible, and find all is in accordance with the Bible. So Kimberly is giving your book a bit of a plug there, and I just want to bring it up onto the screen. I want to encourage people to go and check it out. Look, the Kindle version, is that showing on the screen now there, Brian? Yes. So, my guest today is Brian Neumann, and this is his book, The White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. And the Kindle version is only like $5. You can get the paperback for $20-ish. And I just encourage everyone to go and grab this book.
Is that Australia?
Now that is, look, I would advise people to work out where you are in the world with Amazon and just type in the White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism, Brian Neumann as author, and it'll come up in your world, wherever you are in the world. And I've spoken to 2 people that bought it in the last couple of days, and they had no problem downloading the Kindle. Now, if there is a problem, you've had a wonderful offer to people. Just share what that is. I think regarding your email.
Yeah. So my email, all lowercase, Crux Creations Productions, spelt as it sounds, CRUX Productions, Crux Creations Productions, one long word, at gmail.com. And if you are having trouble trying to get that on Amazon and for some reason you can't get it, send me an email and I'll send you a copy.
Awesome. I'm going to bring that up onto the screen as well if I can. I'll just see if it works.
Right.
Let's just see if this comes up onto the screen. Is that accurate?
I don't see it yet. I see the White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism on the top. I don't see anything else on the screen.
On the screen now, I think on the audience should be able to see the email address there, cruxcreationsproductions@gmail.com. And I'll leave it up on the screen for a minute or two. If you can't afford to buy the book or you are having trouble downloading it, send an email there to Brian and he will send you a free copy PDF version there. So I'll leave that up on the screen for a minute. Okay. So into some Ellen White stuff. And I tell you what, just these baptismal vows, I'm going to be doing a whole program on just going through them and looking at the subtle ways that you're signing up for something that if you look closely, you may think twice about it, but that's for another program. So I was chatting to, and I've got a mental blank who it was, because he came up with this notion that if you're an Adventist apologist, so not talking about your grassroots Adventists that just enjoy being an Adventist, whatever, but if you're an Adventist apologist, where you're kind of making public statements that support the church, and they're often done in a scripted kind of way, he said they're either duped or dishonest. And I later added some other D words, deluded and disingenuous, because they and kind of almost without exception, I've tested this theory that an Adventist apologist is either duped, deluded, dishonest, or disingenuous, and some of that overlaps. When you were there doing your support with amazing discoveries, which do you feel that you were? at that time? Were you duped, deluded, dishonest, or disingenuous?
I was definitely genuine. I would say I was duped, for want of a better term, but yes, but I believed it with all my heart. So there are those who really do believe it with all their heart, and at whatever point in time they find themselves at when they're doing that. And that's the thing about, you can be really genuine, but you can be wrong, you know. And I think that's where I was at. I was really genuine, but I was wrong.
Yeah.
And like Paul was really genuine. He really thought that he was doing God's work by going out and killing the Christians, and until he met Christ on the road to Damascus and realized, oh, actually, I'm wrong. And that's kind of that thing, you know. You've got to have that Damascus experience. And you know, thankfully, this is one thing I do believe, is that God reads the heart more importantly than anything else. And like I said earlier, God's going to say, hey, you know, he's not going to say to you, you had some of those facts wrong. I'm sorry, you're done. Even though you might be, God's looking at people, as long as the real core of what your belief is and what sustains you and what you are assuring people of is the actual foundation for salvation. When that's there, that's what's really important. And unfortunately, the very foundational teachings in Adventism with regards to, especially with what the pioneers believed and Ellen White promoted, with what actually is going to cause you to be saved or not, are actually not only wrong, but they're dangerous. And that is the big problem. So when I realized that, and I realized, you know what, I'm genuine, I'm wrong, but at the same time, if I stick around in this, and I'm going to believe some of these fundamental teachings about what is going to cause you to be lost or saved, and I'm going to carry on teaching that, I'm going to be misleading people. So at some point, if you come to that realization, you really got to rethink what your ministry and where you stand. And that's kind of the point where I came to. So yeah, I was duped, and yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. I feel
have all the information, you know, at the time.
exactly.
Well.
Yeah. I feel like I was an Adventist apologist, like you, musician, traveling around, you know, every gig I did, I said to the young people, stay in the church, you know, stay in the church, bring about the change. And I was duped, because even though I knew the theological things kind of weren't adding up, I was being told by the leaders above me, the youth leaders, no, it's going to change. There's movement happening. And by the time I'm 53, I go, no, there's not. It's not changing. I want to bring in something that Kay Judge just wrote a little earlier. And thank you for watching, Kay. I really enjoy your input. You challenge me all the time, and I'm looking forward to having you on the program one day. Kay has written, all religions change. Just because a believer in Christ no longer believes exactly as historical Adventists did, does not mean they are not an Adventist. Ellen White agreed that truth is progressive. You are being judgmental about believers' faith positions. I don't think that is kind or necessary. It doesn't portray an acceptance of the faith journey of each believer. Thank you for that, Kay. And I apologize for being unkind if it's coming across that way. What are your thoughts on what Kay just said there?
Well, I would say I apologize for if it come across as unkind as well, but I have made it very clear that your salvation is not dependent on your denomination, and if you're happy where you are, that's fine. I would say Ellen White's statement with regards to the truth being progressive, one's got to understand what Ellen White means when she says that. Ellen White makes it very clear that nothing in the scriptures ever, and that her writings, vice versa, let's put it the other way around, that her writings never contradicted scripture. Everything, and by the way, what I'm telling you now, although I'm ad-libbing it, these statements are absolutely first-hand source materials in this book, and The White Elephant. She made it absolutely clear that nothing is in disagreement with scripture, and that nobody can contradict that statement. And so when Ellen White says to you that truth is progressive, it is to the point where more light is coming, but it will never contradict the light that has been given, i.e., the light that has been given Ellen White. And you can read her writings over and over again about the authority of the spirit of prophecy of her writings, and you will see that that is exactly what she meant. So if she says that, yes, true, but that is what she means when she says it. It does not contradict the light that has already been given.
Yes, yes. A lot of progressive Adventists claim that Ellen was into this progressive truth. And look, if there is any hope for progressive Adventists and gospel Adventism, it is when they make claims that, hey, well, if Ellen said that, we're going to go to the Bible. If the Bible disagrees with her, we're going with that. The biggest problem I have with that, no matter how progressive you can say Ellen White was, she claimed a lot of these things, confirmed a lot of these things in vision as if God had told her. So you can't really progress from her supporting the investigative judgment, for example, and the shut door, for example. You can't say she's progressed from that if God actually told her that
God
was confirmed,
Yeah, God never second guesses himself. So if God is going to tell somebody, and there are so many of her statements that start off with, the Lord has said, or the Lord revealed to me, or God has said, when that is the basis or the authority behind your statement, then you've gone to the highest authority that exists in the universe. And if there is a light that progresses above what God has said, providing it's right, of course, but if you progress above that and that light contradicts what God has said, then there's a problem. Then either the only way to test that, and that is why we need the Bible. The only way to test whether the God has said is really a God has said is to go to the Word of God itself and say, let's see, to the law and to the testimony, if it speaks not according to this, it's because there's no light in it. There's no light in it because it's not speaking according to the law and the testimony. So I know where I'm going to go with, and that's what I'm going to go with. So you always run up against that every time you are going to accept greater light and it contradicts something that Ellen White said.
Yes.
And then you're going to say, okay, let me find out where the truth really is. Go to the Bible, and then you find, oh, the Bible actually agrees with the greater light I've got. Well, then Ellen White was wrong, which means really, if she said God said, either she's lying, or she was deluded, or she was in a trance with some other entity, or whatever it was she was doing. But if she said God has said, she's claiming the highest authority in the universe. And if she was not deluded, then she's a liar.
Yeah.
That's the only.
And Kay, if you're still watching, if you're confronted with this idea that you want to progress in your notion of Adventism, you cannot place Ellen White in the position that she was a prophet or a messenger of God or heard these things, because so many things that she was told are now considered to be wrong or considered to be, taken out of context, as George Knight often says. But the reality is, if she was an inspiring woman, and I think she was very inspirational, and boy, she stood up to tough situations and soldiered on and really brought about community in many good ways. But you could then deal with this. You go, okay, well, she was wrong about shut door. She was wrong about the reform dress. She was wrong about the food for worms vision, because she's not talking to God, so God didn't confirm these things. But if you put Ellen White in the picture, you have to agree that God spoke to her and confirmed these happenings that are not correct. So I'd be very interested, Kay, in what your thoughts are on that. Stephen Beagles is watching, and he has said, and hi, Stephen, by the way, I would resign today if I had to. I do believe Ellen G. White had a spiritual gift. See, and then does spiritual gift mean that she can say, well, like, for example, the food for worms, this one well. She literally said, there are people in this room who will see Jesus come, who will die and be food for worms. A prophet cannot later on say, oh, that was a conditional vision. If you'd followed the three angels' message and done what Jesus would have returned by now.
Which was the comeback.
Yeah, you can't add that later. If you're a prophet, I think Jonah might have said, unless you change, you're going to be destroyed.
Right.
He added that condition into the prophecy. Ellen didn't add it in there.
Right. Exactly.
So what does spiritual gifts mean, Stephen Beagles?
So, I would say spiritual. Aleister Crowley had spiritual gifts, but it was a different kind of spiritual gift. And there are many people who had spiritual gifts in Christianity, that when you weigh up what that Joseph Smith of the Mormons had spiritual gifts. He had visions, he had all kinds of things. In fact, there were a number of visions he had that were more accurate than Ellen White's visions concerning the Civil War. But that's another story, which I do write about that in the book as well. But the fact of the matter is that spiritual gifts, if you're going to talk about that, you must specify what spirit is behind the gift, because it could be another spirit and not the Spirit of God. Now, yeah, so spiritual gifts are, when you deal with something which is a revelation from God, it is very specific. And it has to conform to what God has already revealed through his word. That message must. And by the way, God did say, in scripture we read that if a prophet prophesies and that prophecy does not come to pass, you can know that I did not send him.
Yeah, only one time as well.
That's right.
Only one time. And if
Yeah.
you look at her reform dress, that didn't turn out like she said God told her it would.
So yeah, one's got to ask the question, then who sent you? Who sent her then?
Yeah.
Who was it? This is an interesting thing. Sorry, Peter.
No, go for it.
Single denomination originates somewhere. If you go back to the early Protestant movement, first of all, of course, we have the early Christian church. The early Christian church was made up of, first of all, started by the disciples and the apostles who went out and preached the gospel and converted people to Christ. Churches were established in different centers around Asia Minor and so on. And then these churches, for example, Revelation talks about the 7 churches. They are key examples of churches that existed. But at that time, they called themselves Christians. Somewhere along the line during that history, people started saying, well, I need to establish, because my little teaching or my doctrine that I have for my group that I've got here in Laodicea, let's say, for example, differs a little bit from those in Smyrna. So we're going to call ourselves, for want of a better term right now, Laodiceans. Or and then later on, when we go to the Protestant movement, finally you have different churches springing up. Luther came up with his teachings, and they became Lutherans, and you had Hussites, and you had people who followed Wycliffe, and so on. Yet Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, he offers a warning. He says, those of you, I hear there's disputes amongst you. Some of you say, I'm of Apollos, and I am of this one and that one. And he says, no, you're of Christ. That's who you've got to be of. So that is the problem with Christianity. They all have different origins. They have some sort of platform on which they're built. That's where they came from. And then they built on top of that. And that's why we have so many denominations. Instead of realizing, regardless of what differentiation there is in the beliefs you have, you're Christian or you're not a Christian. So what I'm leading up to is this. Adventism has an origin. The Adventist church would never have come into being, at least in the way it did. Obviously that's debatable, but there are very clear set of circumstances that gave rise to the Adventist church. This is the foundation. This is what you would call the very key thing that birthed the Adventist movement. Yeah. And that which birthed the Adventist movement was the 1844 message as given by William Miller. Now, some might say, no, hang on, the church wasn't around. No, they built on that. So that is where it all began. In fact, Ellen White, in the early writings of the church, built on the platform of what William Miller taught. William Miller, this is interesting. You've obviously read this in the book, but I want to dwell on this because a lot of Adventists avoid this, because especially the Adventists who are of the more conservative Adventist group, like Walter Fite, Amazing Discoveries, or those types of ones, and they're very strong in their belief. I'm not, I respect them for being strong in what they believe, but I still believe they're wrong. But they avoid this because they know if I do this, I'm going to have problems with trying to explain a lot of other things that I've been teaching in my seminars or lectures about the origins of other religions and other faiths and what they stand for and believe in. So bear in mind, William Miller was at the beginning, before he became a Christian, he was a deist. William Miller, as a deist, believed in a higher power. In fact, William Miller believed in a higher power and was a deist partly because he was affiliated with a Freemasonry. He was a Freemason of the highest order. In fact, in my book, I quote from the memoirs of William Miller by Himes and Bliss. And that is the most primary source you can get on William Miller and his history.
What
That's
was it again? Which book was it again?
It's called Memoirs of William Miller by Himes and Bliss. Those are the authors. They were proteges of William Miller, and whenever it fell apart after 1844, they decided to write the book, The Memoirs of William Miller. But now the interesting thing about this, he was not only was he a Freemason, he was the master of his lodge. He had the highest possible degrees that anybody could have at that time in Freemasonry. Then he became a Christian. He became a Christian and started studying the Bible in 1816. That's when he discovered Jesus.
He didn't leave Freemasonry.
And then when he started studying the Bible, he spent another 14 to 16 years, whatever it was. I think it was 1831, and it's all documented in my book, and it's in the Memoirs of William Miller. In 1831, for all these years, he remained a Freemason. Why am I talking about Freemasonry? Sorry, just to sidetrack. The reason being, because you have these conservative Adventists like Walter Fite, for example, who will go out and preach about Billy Graham and all these Christian leaders who are actually secret 32-degree Freemasons. And they are actually, because Freemasonry, if you read some of the books of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, for example, will tell you that very often those who are high Freemasons, when they use the name Jesus Christ, it's like a blind, because actually they're referring to the devil. That's who they're really speaking about. So they're actually Satan worshippers, Walter Fite will tell you, and I quote that in my book as well. But what I'm saying is they will go out and they will tell you about all these preachers in Christianity who are preaching about Jesus, but they are secretly following the devil, and they are all Freemasons. Yet when it comes to William Miller, they will not tell you that for 13 or 14 years after he had converted his life to Christ, he remained a Freemason. During that period of time, he came up with his 2,300-day interpretation of Daniel. He came up and worked out all those prophecies, studied the Bible, yet was still master of his lodge, continued. It was Lodge 72, I think, that he was master, Lodge 27, I beg your pardon, that he was master of. All those years, he was a Freemason. So I'm asking people, if I had to ask Walter Fite, I'd say to him, how do you explain somebody coming up with one of the apparently one of the greatest time prophecies in the Bible, interpreting that while they are actually a worshiper of Satan, because that's what you're saying they are, they're a worshiper of Satan. And now at the end of those years, just before you go into public ministry and you're now going to go out and preach to the world what you've discovered, now you decide to leave Freemasonry and denounce it. So why I'm telling you this is there's a problem. The problem is this, is Adventists hide that kind of history. Ellen White tells you, even in her writings, when she talks about William Miller, she just refers to the fact that he was a deist and then he gave his life to Christ and that was done with. No, it was not the case. William Miller then began his public ministry, preached twice. He got the time frame wrong. And then finally in 1844, when the final big date came along, lo and behold, everybody went out, some of them in their white robes onto the mountaintops and everywhere else. And by the way, it was not the whole world. It was mostly New England where all this was happening. A few thousand people really, and maybe a few scattered parts of the world. So this was not a worldwide gospel message that Jesus was coming, God to prepare him, because the Bible tells us, and this gospel will be preached in all the world, then the end will come. But that's just an aside. So what I'm saying is that they went out there, and then what happened? Midnight struck. Jesus did not come. In fact, if one has to look at any prophetic event in Scripture, because every single event in Scripture that happened with time prophecy is marked by something significant. The prophecy regarding that happened on the day of Pentecost, which you find in Daniel, Christ, his crucifixion, and whatever. But every time prophecy that there is marked by something that signals to the world something actually took place here that is very significant. The outpouring of the Holy Spirit, or whatever you want to call it. The biggest non-event in history that took place was 1844, because not a single soul in the world knew what was happening, except for those people who went out to meet him. But for them, it was a great disappointment because nothing happened for them either. And here's the problem. Ellen White writes about the fact that while William Miller was preaching this message, which he discovered while he was a fully fledged Freemason, and she condemns Freemasonry, by the way. Brother Falkey was one of those people that she condemned, an Australian gentleman who was a Freemason, and she told him that you can't be involved in Freemasonry. but I don't even know if she knew about William Miller's Mason connection, but if she did, she was hiding it. But the fact of the matter is that she writes so much about that 1844, prior to the Great Disappointment, how angels of God were going out proclaiming with the preachers like William Miller and Himes and Bliss, all these great preachers. They were there speaking to the hearts of the people because they were giving that message that Jesus was returning, and based on the parable of the 10 virgins, which actually was a parable actually about the real second coming, not about moving from the holy to the most holy, but that's another aside. So she writes all about that, and then that non-event takes place in 1844, and suddenly everybody is left with this, well, now how do we explain what happened? So if people really want to talk about, but I mean, just my imagination, sometimes I have to think about this because I'm not sure. I can't say this is for real, but sometimes I have to wonder, if you wanted to confuse a lot of people and you were a Freemason and you were trying to come up with something to really shake Christianity and cause a split and create chaos and confusion, that would have been a good thing to do. I'm just saying. I'm not saying that was the motive. What I'm saying is, how did this all happen? Because you know what? All the Christian preachers of that time said to William Miller and his men, they said, the Bible tells us very clearly that nobody knows the day or the hour that Jesus is coming, yet you have set a date of 1844 and an exact date, October 22, for when Jesus will return. And Ellen White writes about those people who said that and says that they were being led by devils, that they were being deceived. And then when finally all of this falls apart and it doesn't really happen, then Ellen White, well, of course, it started with Hiram Edson first, because he was the guy after the Great Disappointment on that morning who received a revelation that Jesus actually had passed from the holy to the most holy. And immediately you have to say, well, there's already the very first thing that they came up with to explain why the Great Disappointment took place. The very first foundational teaching that Jesus passed from the holy to the most holy was already an anti-scriptural teaching. Adventism is founded on the most fundamentally unbiblical teaching, because Paul makes it very clear that Jesus Christ passed from the holy to the most holy, went through the curtain into the most holy, sat on the throne with the Father. You read the book of Hebrews, it's unequivocally clear. Adventists have debated this forever, because there are so many of them who see, Bible scholars in Adventism, who see there's a problem with this teaching because Paul contradicts it, and they find all kinds of clever ways to get around this. And Desmond Ford is one prime example of somebody who recognized and saw there is a problem with this sanctuary doctrine. But it's not only that, Peter. The problem was then that in order to really drive the nail in, Ellen White decided, well, you know what? Well, she received the vision. I'm sorry, God revealed to her at that time what happened. And I might sound very passionate, and I am, because it's such a wrong teaching. Because she claimed that God revealed to her, that showed her in vision, that what actually happened was, and this is the kind of picture that she paints, and again, it's in the book, prime sources are there with all the statements, that Jesus was in the holy. When he moved from the holy to the most holy place to sit with the Father on the throne, Satan came and took his place on, now of course it's meant to be symbolic, but nonetheless, took his place on his throne, and the whole of the Christian world, other than this group of Adventists who with Hiram Edson and the others accepted that teaching, they were now actually focusing on Satan and worshiping Satan. So now here's the problem. Because all of the Christian world since the time of early Christianity, since the time of the apostles, in fact, all the great Christian preachers, including Martin Luther and all these great Christian preachers, every single one of them preached that Jesus, for 2,000 years, let's say ostensibly, were preaching that Jesus was in the most holy. Why did they preach it? Because Paul said it was in the book of Hebrews. So for Ellen White to turn around and say that they were focused on the holy is a load of bull dust. Sorry to use the phrase, because they were already for 2,000 years preaching the most holy. because that is what Paul taught.
Mm.
And now in 1844, they were already in the most holy. And only now were Ellen White and Hiram Edson and all these other people catching up and focusing on the most holy. So there's a huge load of contradictions. So put it all together. There's this Freemason who remains in Freemasonry while he's discovering this doctrine and providing Freemasonry's evil and everything else. That would be a problem. Okay, then he goes out and preaches this message. He gets it wrong 3 times. The third time, of course, his 1844 was totally wrong. And then after that, you have a guy coming the next morning and say, oh, I know what happened. He went to the most holy, which of course contradicts what Paul teaches in the Bible. And then after that, Ellen White receives her light. And she says, actually, they are worshiping the devil, really. And the door is shut for them. And we are the ones that only have the truth. That whole foundation that laid the groundwork for which that pillar of Adventist faith, upon which all these things were built on, is a false doctrine.
And to progress from that, yeah, exactly. And to progress from that, as Kay was saying, the church is doing and Ellen White did, you have to then admit that the foundation was wrong. And to do that, and to do that, if the Gospel Adventists are willing to do that, they have to greatly diminish the authority of Ellen G. White.
Yeah, but the problem, you see, that's where the other fear is, because the leaders know this. The ones who have been studying, they know this 100% sure, because Ellen White said that if you remove any one of the foundational pillars of Adventist faith, all the others will fall with it. She was dead right. We've removed that pillar because it's a false one, and I'm telling you now, all those other pillars will fall with them.
It crumbles.
That's sad, the truth.
Man, what you've just said there, incredible, astounding, and very deep food for thought. We're going to cut to a break. I'm going to go and I've used up all my nice herbal tea here. I'm going to go and make some more. I also have to quickly deal with a little bit of homeschooling stuff. So we're going to have a 5-minute break. If we come back and I'm not here, can you just riff for a while about your book for 5 minutes on your own?
I'll talk. I'm to the room as well, so I'll be back.
Yeah, great. So we're going to have a 5-minute break, everyone. Join us. And when we return, Brian may be on his own for 5 minutes. He's going to talk a little bit about his book. And then I'm going to just get you to actually find some other specific things. You've just done an incredible chat about the investigative judgment and this whole foundation. I want you to kind of, when we come back, talk a little bit about some other things that as you were defending Ellen White, you went, hang on a second here. And we're just going to look at some of those specific cases. So thanks for watching, everyone. We will be back in 5 minutes. My very special guest is Brian Neumann, author of The White Elephant. And if you can't get your Kindle version, which is only $5, I'll bring up on the screen his email address and he'll send you a free PDF of it. Back in 5 minutes.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hi, I'm Brian Neumann. I'm alone right now, but Peter will join us in a minute. I'll take the opportunity just to share a few thoughts before Peter joins us again. You know, the interesting thing about what we've been discussing regarding Ellen White, of course, and the origins of the Adventist Church and some of the teachings, and that is that sometimes when you step away from something, like I had to do when I stepped outside of the Adventist bubble, and I started looking at things from a different perspective and saying, I've got to empty my mind of what I've been taught before. And I have to look at the Bible and the Bible alone, really look at the Bible and the Bible alone without making any comparisons with Ellen White. Let the Bible speak to me. Let the Spirit of God speak to me. When I did that, and when my wife Cami did that, we started realizing that there were so many things which we did not see before. One of the things is that Adventist interpretation of end-time Bible prophecy. If you study end-time Bible prophecy, and particularly the 1,000 years of Christ's reign on this earth, by the way, is what the conclusion we came to, simply based on a one example I can give you is Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. When it speaks about the statue and the stone kingdom, the stone kingdom, which is Christ, the rock comes down and smashes that kingdom and fills the whole earth. The Bible is very clear that those who will sit with God and rule on thrones, it will be during the 1,000-year period. But where does that happen? So when you read Revelation and you start taking those things into account and you start studying Bible prophecy and letting Revelation speak to you without any guidance from any other outside source, you start realizing, based on what the scripture says, that actually those 1,000 years are not up there, somewhere out there in heaven. It is the New Jerusalem on earth where the 1,000-year reign actually takes place. Now, this is not really what our discussion is about here today, but I thought I'd add that in. And my wife wrote an incredible book on that topic, studying Bible prophecy based on the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation primarily, and what they were about. And her book is a book called, let me hold it up there so you can see, Destiny's Dream. It's actually available on Amazon as well, where she goes into great depth explaining these things. Now, don't accept my word for it. Go onto Amazon, read the book. It's downloadable on Kindle as well, and see what you think about it, because you'll start finding out that there are many more things that you thought were correct based on what the Bible was supposedly teaching, that you will find out is not really found in the scripture. Another interesting book where she deals with these topics as well is her book Soul Provider, which is a daily devotional book. There you will see. It's also, all of these books are available on the same site on Amazon and available in Kindle books as well.
My name, Brian. My name.
And all you have to do is type in Cami Lynn, and the title of the book, of course, would be Soul Provider. And of course, her surname as well, Cami Lynn Neumann. And you will be able to access those books and read about these things. We started a ministry which is called a New Creation Ministry, taken from our last name, Neumann. And basically what we want to do is share with the world the things that we have been discovering as we have been studying the Bible and letting the Bible speak to us about the truth and what God is saying to us through the scriptures and the scriptures alone. So another inspirational book actually by Cami, which is one of the favorites. It's not about Bible prophecy, but it's a book entitled Oh, to be a Vulcan. And it's a book on neo-Stoicism. And it is a very interesting read, especially for those who are interested in building character and
Emotional control.
And especially when you're trying to have more emotional control over yourself. It's a tremendous book that guides one in that. It's helped me, that's for sure. Well, it's still helping me. But yes, so there's Peter. We're back again. I thought I'd take a bit of opportunity to speak about Tammy's books as well.
I'm glad you did, and I knew that I was leaving the show in safe hands. And I think I heard Cami in the background there a little bit. Is she willing just to poke her head on and give us a wave?
Cammy's my guide.
Yeah. Would come and say hi, Cami, if you want to. No pressure.
No, she's going to come here. I want her to be here. There's
Hey, Cami. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I'm interested in that last book you held up. Can you hold that up again for us?
Oh, to be a Vulcan.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, because it's
I like that.
The whole Stoic thing is pretty big in what was his name? Mr. Spock. He was a Stoic.
Spock.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. He was a Stoic, all right. Live long and prosper. Are you enjoying the conversation today, Cami?
Very much. It's very interesting.
It's fascinating. You're welcome to stick around. Nikki Carlton has just written, "How many red flags does one need for a false prophet?"
That's a good question.
I'm interested in stick around, Cami. Great to have you to be here and commenting adding your thoughts and whatnot as well. We chatted earlier where you had kind of found your way out of Adventism via trying to defend Ellen White. And as I said, I'd watched you on a program where you were an Adventist apologist, very much defending Ellen White. I think that was the topic from memory anyway. You'd mentioned that of those duped, deluded, dishonest, disingenuous, that you and I also put myself under this, that I was duped. I was offered this kind of carrot of things are changing. And I feel a little bit, what's the word for it? It's not resentful. I was pondering this the other day, but I feel a little bit, I don't know. I'll try and come up with a word, but there's something about the progressives that lured me into continuing and staying, that I just found that they've let me down. I'm not a victim. I'm not claiming any kind of victimhood, but those guys, the ones above me there that kept promoting this gospel Adventism, that things are changing, and maybe they really felt they were, maybe they really think they are. But the Adventist Church has always got Ted Wilson. It's always got the Walter Weiss, the Dennis Preebys. It's got your Doug Batchelors. It's fertile soil for this core DNA teaching of Ellen White, holding her up as a high authority, that surely they know that that's never going to change. Sure, they might have their pockets within it, but I just feel let down by them, because they're thinking of their own journey, their own connection with Jesus, not realizing that by being a proselytizer for the Adventist Church, by being an apologist for the Adventist Church, that this people join the church, young children grow up in the church, and they stumble very easily into the Walter Weiss type teachings, into the Ted Wilson, the president of the church teachings, into the billion books that are going to be released of the great controversy. So I feel let down that they're not speaking up enough to define their gospel Adventism, to speak against the traditional Adventists. They do it in their quiet little gatherings and behind the scenes, and they've got their own little camaraderie thing going on. But I think they're letting down the team by not really saying yes. Not only they tend to go, oh, well, she was a lovely woman and she had flaws and faults. No, it's deeper than that. There are absolute theological inaccuracies that they have to boldly say she was wrong. That did not come from God.
Dangerous ones on top of it. Dangerous.
That's right. It's spiritual abuse. It's very selfish to go, oh, well, I'm going to have my nice little lovely church and Jesus is my focus.
Right.
Young kids are going along to church meetings and they're like little lambs led to slaughter with some of the absolute dangerous theology that they're being taught. It's reprehensible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, I'd say it's one of the saddest things, and I was going to use the term that you use. It's disappointing, and one feels cheated in a way when you walk away from something like that and realize actually what is really going on. Talking about Adventist prophecy, end time prophecy, and now considering the end time scenario. I mean, I don't know if you were around when Dr. Ben Carson, prior to the 2016 election, when he was running.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've been following him for years.
Yeah, and he came and gave a talk at Avondale.
Yeah,
and that talk at Avondale, he made specific reference, and of course, by that time, it was known that he was going to run. And at that time, he actually, I don't know if I have it in this version, because I had an earlier version of The White Elephant, and I condensed it. But in that one, I quoted Dr. Ben Carson, because I was focusing on that. The book came out in 2016, the first one. But he made an interesting comment, because he was speaking about Adventists and view on end time prophecy. There was the question that was asked him by the person who was on stage asking him questions. And he spoke about the fact that in America, of course, we have the Republicans. They are to the right. And you probably know this understanding of end time prophecy based on the kinds of things Ellen White said and what is revealed in the Great Controversy, that at the end of time, it's going to appear that the people are going to turn back to God. It's going to be in America, specifically, because that's what's been spoken of there, America is going to be the one, the Republican Party, because they are the right. There's going to be this move back to Christianity. But she says, and of course he reiterated this point, they're going to go back to Sunday. And that is where the danger lies. Sunday, and of course she speaks about the dual false teaching, Sunday and the eternal hellfire, the life after death sort of thing. And anyway, what he said was, it's going to come from the right, and there's this change that's going to take place, and there's going to appear to be this movement back to Christ. But yes, and even back to the commandments, to conservatism. But these two false teachings are going to be the spearhead of this so-called revival, and Satan is the one who's behind this. I'm ad-libbing, of course, but that's the gist of what is being said. So he actually spoke about that, and here's the irony of it. Today we are facing a situation politically in the world where it is not, and before I even share that, bear in mind that the Adventist Church, since the time of Ellen White herself, and all have been preaching the end of the world is just right upon us. In fact, that's the reason why she made that statement about food for worms, was because she believed that the door was shut and Christ was about to return. It was because of the shut door theory and that the rest of the world was lost that she started saying that, you'll remember in the book I write about the Atkinson visit that Ellen White did with Israel Damon and that other prophet.
Yes, yeah.
Crazy affair that took place there. They were all preaching the shut door. It was the time had come. Everybody was lost except those who would be baptized again and would become part of this little Adventist group. So what I'm saying is Adventist has continually been preaching this message. Ellen White in her day preached. In her day, she said, get out into the country. Everybody must get out into the country because the end is coming. And even when the Civil War came, they told them, don't vote, don't get involved because Christ is coming very soon. And what we've got to do is get out in the country. We've got to plant our own stuff. And we've got to do, guess what, everybody, all those people who moved out in the country in her day because Christ was going to come, well, they're all dead for starters. But in every single one of those locations today where they were out in the country, it is now massive cities and civilization that has taken over everything. So where's your country that you moved out into? You're all in cities now. So what I'm saying is Adventism has always preached this just on the brink. Jesus is coming.
Yeah,
and
imminent.
I'm not saying he's not coming. I believe he's coming soon. I'm not going to put a time frame onto it or try and say that it's today or tomorrow. But here's the problem. While they've been preaching the so-called revival, spurious revival that's going to be taking place, guess what's taking over the world? Absolute liberalism is taking over the world. They are trying to shut down Christians' voices everywhere around the world. In America, guess who's being attacked? It's Christians. Christians are the ones who are being attacked. Even Catholics are the ones who are being attacked. Even the Catholic Church, who was supposed to be the one who's going to bring about this massive false revival that is going to take place. It is all the left-wing, or shall I say, the liberal types of policies that are gaining ground, whether it's LGBTQ rights or whether it's transgender rights or whatever. You dare open your mouth against that, you could end up in jail. So what I'm saying is, it is not a spiritual revival that is taking place with Christianity. It is a satanic revival that is taking place. And I'd like to know right now where Adventist Bible prophecy is actually being fulfilled with regards to that so-called spurious revival that Ellen White spoke about that's supposed to take place, when right now it is a completely different kind of satanic revival that is taking place. The only thing that they can come up with probably at this point in time is to say, well, it might just be right now that that's where it's going, but maybe it's going to go so far that then the right is going to get in and they're going to gain power again. And then there is going to be this false spiritual revival. But I can tell you now that that is not what's happening. So people need to take another look as well at what Adventist prophecy is teaching. Look at the book of Daniel and Revelation and see whether what they are teaching about end time events is actually really happening the way that they said it was going to happen.
Yeah, it's it seems to be very different to what she was predicting in the Great Controversy. If you read chapter 29, chapter 30, chapter 39, chapter 40, I've read those over and over again this year, those four chapters. It doesn't even look like the same predictions.
No. There's not a Sunday keeping revival happening now. In America, they're trying to shut down the Sunday churches. You go to church on a Sunday, you're an idiot. And the left hate you because you are going to church on a Sunday. And it's not just the left who are a fringe, it's the government itself is trying to shut you down. So it's difficult to see in the, I'm not saying the scenario could not change, but it's difficult to see in the current scenario of what is happening in the world today, where this so-called false spiritual revival and back to God revival, so-called, that they are speaking about and Ellen White wrote about is actually happening. It's not happening.
Yeah. I'm going to read a comment on one of our Facebook. He's a top contributor, actually, Barry Beeden, and he's definitely on the traditional Adventist view, and I enjoy his comments. So thank you, Barry. And he's written quite a long post. I'm just going to read part of it. This program, he's talking about us, doesn't seem to get down to the nitty gritty of what truth is. Barry, I'm wondering if you're watching this program. We are being nitty gritty. We are suggesting that we have looked at what truth is, and we're refuting the Adventist claim to their version of truth. He goes on to say, many are just claiming they have the truth, but not really showing evidence for it from the so-called progressives particularly. And thank you, Barry, for pointing that out. That is very true. The progressives often just say, hey, focus on Jesus, but they don't refute a lot of these complicated Adventist pillars, and they don't clearly define what their truth is. They just kind of don't want to talk about it, and they want to just stop attacking us. He goes on to say the church has outlined their beliefs in the fundamentals. In short, why not try and break it down and tell us really why you don't believe in 1844 and the chief pre-Adventist judgment, which is blatantly obvious to me. So, Barry, you've often said this to me in comments, and I have broken that down, and I have no compunction or compulsion, whatever the correct word is, to sit down with someone and say, you're wrong because of this, and I'm right because of this. I have done my own study. What I'm actually saying to you, Barry, I'll just finish what you've said. Why not look at the teaching of sanctification and its importance in salvation? I have done. So have Cami and Brian. And its importance in salvation. Why do you have problems with Ellen G. White? Okay, well, if you are listening to this program, you will know why we have problems with Ellen G. White, and that they've been presented many, many times on this program. But what Brian and Cami and I are saying, and many others, are actually, Barry, this is your church. You are defending the beliefs that the overarching message of Adventism is your birthright. I'm not challenging on that. I'm saying that I don't believe your conclusions, but you have certainly assessed Adventism accurately, and you're holding on to its 1844 pre-Advent judgment. You're holding on to its salvation teachings. Good on you. That's great. And I want you to come on the show and share, your thoughts and defenses in those beliefs. So it's a nuanced thing that I've had trouble getting across to you, Barry, and to others. We support your claim that what you believe is actually accurate to what Ellen White taught and to what the church stands for. I'm trying to tease apart the gospel Adventist from the traditional Adventist, the progressive to the traditional, so that you can stop warring with each other and holding each other back. I'm not actually criticizing either of you or casting judgment. I'm just saying I've thought about it, used my own brain, don't believe in what the Adventists teach. Fine. But as I've left, I've gone, wow, these two sides are just warring with each other and holding each other back. So, Barry, good on you for believing what you believe and drawing those conclusions using your own brain. But when the whole debate is not to try and convince you you're wrong. We're saying you are right with your assessment of Adventism. We don't agree with your conclusion. Anyway, that was a bit there. Yeah, go for it, Cami.
I just wanted to say that's why the books are written. The books are written so that people can get a full explanation of why we have come to the conclusions we have from the Bible and from the history of the church. So that's why the books are there, because they go into great detail if people really want to know. So you can't go into every single aspect of everything in an interview, of every single reason why Ellen White was wrong or what is wrong with Adventism. That's not possible. But you can talk about a few things that can kind of get people's minds working and thinking, well, yeah, and questioning a little bit, and then saying, okay, then I need to actually look into this book and see what it actually has to say. And if people accuse people of trying to make money, we offer all the books for free.
Yeah,
so we're not trying to make money.
So
If you want to be an author, an artist, a musician, and make a living, believe me, it's probably not the best path to go down. Or a podcaster.
So I'm going to say something to Barry, if that's possible.
Very true,
So,
Cammy.
I've been on both sides of the question. I do know the truth as it is from an Adventist perspective, and I know that truth very well. Not only do I know it because I accepted what I was being told by somebody else and said, well, my pastor said to me, this is it, and I believe it, or because I read it in Ellen White. In the context of the Adventist bubble and the information available to me, I studied with all my heart and all my soul. I delved into it, but it was within that paradigm. But to the point where I defended Ellen White, the truth of Ellen White, if I can call it that, the truth of the Adventist doctrine and teaching with all my heart. I was a powerful defender of that truth. And so I know that truth better than anybody knows it. I mean, I'm saying there are people that know just as well, but it's by way of expression. Yeah. I know that truth so well. But then I came to the realizations that I described in the beginning of our interview. And then I stepped outside of that truth and that bubble and started looking at things from a different perspective. And that is why, after looking at that truth from a different perspective and evaluating it and looking at some of the things we've touched on tonight in this interview, I eventually came up with a book called The White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism, because I realized that while I was in that bubble, I had been misled. I had been, as we said earlier, duped by what is happening. And I don't want to be facetious, but people need to consider, just ask the question, am I being duped by this? If you are, and this is one of the problems I've run into when I've done Facebook discussions with people, with Adventists who are trying to defend Ellen White, is I started realizing that, and this is partly because of some of the things Ellen White taught as well, because she told people that you shouldn't even go visit a Sunday church because don't associate with them, don't go to their meetings, don't do anything like that. And I realized that that's the problem with Adventists, is that they are too scared to just step outside of that bubble and look at things in a new light. Because, and here's my challenge, if Adventists are absolutely right with what they believe, if their doctrine is the truth as God intends it to be, and if it is solely based upon the Word of God, you should have absolutely no hesitation at all to look at any other faith, any other truth, any other teaching, any other philosophy, anywhere around the world, and evaluate that and say, it's wrong, because I actually have the truth.
Exactly.
Step outside the bubble.
Yes.
Because you are so sure about Ellen White, and you are so sure, you should not be deceived by anything that anybody could ever throw at you. If you are right, you should not be deceived by what I'm telling you here tonight on this program that we are on. If you are right about it, you will have no hesitation then to actually search for yourself and say, wow, I'm right. I've studied it. Go out there. My challenge is study it for yourself, because if you're right, you will actually prove that you're right.
Exactly. And a lot of the responses that we get from the Adventist apologists, the gospel Adventists, even the traditional Adventists, is, whoa, stop attacking us. No, we're just scrutinizing your truth claim. But and if it is a truth claim, you should welcome that scrutiny.
And isn't it interesting how Adventists will say that when they're being attacked, but yet they're willing to attack the Catholics. They're willing to attack the rest of the Protestants and actually call them Babylon. They're willing to attack Billy Graham. They're willing to attack anybody and everybody who is not an Adventist. But yet, if they get that on the other, that shoe on the other foot, then it's a different ball game. You got to play by the rules, and you have to take the criticism, and you've got to be able to, like, question yourself. What really
Exactly.
answer these questions? I mean, the Bible tells us to study to show thyself approved. Like, you've got to be a Berean and search the scriptures to see if it's true what you believe.
That's what they search the scriptures daily to see whether those things were so.
Yeah. And yet
And
the default Adventist position is to get very squirmy if there's a spotlight put on them, but to then attack you, their default is to attack the player, not the ball. You go back to pre-Canwright. We talked earlier about Gilbert Cranmer that broke away from the Adventist Church in the 1850s. They attacked him soundly, and he started the Church of God Seventhday. Then Canwright, they just attack right up to Des Ford. You and I, the three of us, would have been attacked. They default to getting all upset, but then attacking way worse than we are doing.
Yeah, in fact, a whole evangelistic series done by leading Adventist evangelists basically take their time to prove how wrong all the other churches are.
Yeah, that's right.
Take some of your own medicine.
Yeah. We aren't attacking, we are scrutinizing.
And truth is not relative. It's either true or it's not. And it's not like, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me. That whole idea is ridiculous. It's there is only one truth. Yeah. And so I think what's interesting about the way that it seems like God works with Christians is he allows us to have all these different denominations and still call yourself a Christian and do all this stuff, because nobody really has all the truth. Yeah. God is the truth. Jesus is the truth. Mm-hmm. And we don't know everything, and we won't know everything until everything is revealed. In fact, the Bible tells us to be careful in what you judge and not judge things before it's time, because in time, everything will be revealed. So it's not about judging. It's about, God gives us his word, and he gives us a brain, and he gives us a free will, and he wants us to use it. And we don't want to be like blind, the blind leading the blind. We've got to study for ourselves. And we've got to stay on our toes. And you're never going to go to a church where you agree with absolutely 100% of everything that's taught all the time. So if people are looking for that, they'll never find a church.
So you can have your own belief, but you can't have your own facts. And the thing about this is that to discover whether your belief that you have is right, go to the Bible and find out the facts and see if it's true. If it's not true, then follow the facts.
Yeah.
The Bible reveals all of that.
And it's simple.
Yeah.
I agree. I've started a group. 2020, I started it. I'll just give it a quick plug because I'd love you both to do a presentation at it for me. It's called Voice Life Fellowship. It's mainly online. We've tried a few actual meetings in the real world, but it's a group where I try and find common ground where we only look at the four Gospels. It's a four gospel focused tribe. Not to say you can't talk about everything else. And often people spin off into little breakaway groups and they talk about all different things. But it's a way to get back to the basics, look at the teachings of Jesus, look at the four gospels, and all the presenters I have, that's their requirement. They can only do a 20, 30-minute gospel presentation using the gospels. They can put their own commentary in it, but they can't bring in other commentators. They can't bring in other books. Now, I know that sounds a bit restrictive, but the point is it's finding common ground to remove all the filters that you've had, and then you can springboard into other things. So I encourage people watching, go and find us on Facebook, Voice Life Fellowship. Go and join. And I would love both of you to do two separate presentations.
Yeah. Can you send me the link a bit later?
Yes, I'll definitely send you the link because the beauty of it is it's common ground. Not many people can disagree with the four Gospels. Yeah, there's different. Sure, you can, but there's a general consensus the beauty of
Right.
the teachings of Jesus in the four Gospels that clears all the filters away and is a great springboard to then go into other things. And I'd love you both to come and present on it. We try and do something every week there, and we're going to get back into running some actual in the real world presentations. Now, I want to spend and I raised that because what you're saying is if you go to the source material of the Bible, this morning I couldn't sleep and I read the chapter in Desire of Ages on Judas. I think it's chapter 76 or something like that. And I don't think Ellen actually says I was shown this to be true, but she creates this whole narrative around Judas that is not anywhere to be found in the Bible. And so when people try and think of the Bible, but they've had an Adventist upbringing, it's very difficult to remove these stories from your brain that are just additional
And sometimes
artistic license.
you realize, oops, that's not in the Bible.
Not in the Bible. Yeah. She has a whole prequel to the Bible
Right.
where Satan's, claiming that no one can keep the commandments and God has to be vindicated, and he's made this false claim. Then there's the Bible. Then she's created this post-biblical era. It's like this incredible trilogy that she's put together, her and Marion Davis and Fanny Bolton and the others, that is incredibly difficult to remove from your psyche as a filter. And so that's why I've started Voice Life Fellowship, not to oppose the church or anything, but just say, hey, let's just get out of this for a minute and look at the four Gospels, the teachings of Jesus. What can we find there that's appealing and good for the life? And it's so simple and basic, and it helps, defrag the mental computer.
Right.
There was a funny thing that I'll just bring up. Paraque Posamos, who has got an incredible YouTube channel, a Facebook group, I think it is. SDAs in 20 years will become the JW 2.0.
Okay.
Hey, Paraque, while you're there, are you able to come on the show tomorrow at this time? I've had to postpone an interview for the following week, and I'm needing a guest tomorrow. Let me know. Shoot me a message. Okay, so I want to kind of wrap up the conversation back to something I've been almost doing throughout our conversation. You realized you were duped. You were presenting Ellen White, and you started going, hang on a second, this is not adding up. I want you to share a few specific things, like we talked about the food for worms. We talked about the American reform dress. What are some key 3 or 4 things that and for you too, Cami, share that you started going, hang on a second, these are specific things that Ellen is claiming that aren't actually adding up?
Yeah, I can think of one immediately, and I'll give you, there's a solid biblical reason for it and historical reason for it as well. Let me just go back though, because when I was an Adventist, I was a conservative Adventist, that goes without saying based on my ministry. And I was a vegan for pretty much that whole time as well. So I ate no meat. I didn't drink coffee. I didn't drink tea. And they were all based, of course, it was based on what Ellen White taught, because there's no absolute, certainly no direct teaching in the Bible regarding coffee and tea. Everybody knows that, of course. And the meat eating thing became more and more clear to me as I continued. But Ellen White made it so clear that those who will be saved, of course, ad-libbing what she said, but that they will not consume coffee, tea. In fact, she brought meat and eggs and cheese into the question as well later on. So basically, it was, as you know, you didn't do that, and especially when I was with people, like when I was at Wildwood, it was considered an absolute, well, it was a major sin, if I could use that term for it. If you touched meat or tea or coffee, it was just not done, because you are not going to be saved if you do that.
Yeah.
So when you become an Adventist and you're in that frame of mind, and you start reading the Bible the way that it should be read, and you start reading, this is an example of how to step out of the bubble and start looking at things. Read the Bible, and I'm going to use this as an example, because this is what happened to me. Read the Bible and say, what does the Bible really have to say about, forget about tea and coffee because it says nothing about that. That was Ellen White, and cheese and eggs because it says nothing about that either. But I hope you're not drinking a cup of coffee there. No, I'm just.
It is a cup. It is a cup of English breakfast tea. So
Oh,
I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm not going to be saved.
so, but you see what happened here, Peter, and for the listeners as well, is when I stepped out the bubble and I said, let me look at this question more deeply. Is Ellen White right by saying, because she actually told ministers and preachers about it, and that's, you remember last time we had the discussion and the other interview we had, I quoted her where she actually told the ministers they should not eat meat and that God would not even hear their prayers and all that. So now these were the things I was dealing with because she said that. And then I started discovering, but Ellen White was eating meat herself. Not only that, she was eating unclean meat and oysters and all these kinds of things. She was trying to hide the fact that she was doing it. So, but what really crunched it for me, and I think for Cami as well, was when we read the Bible, we started looking at what the Bible talks about regarding meat. Ellen White will tell you that when you bring up the subject, for example, of God sending the quails to the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness, he sent it to them because of their disobedience, and they paid the price because they died while the meat was still in their teeth. You know, that's kind of the picture Adventists have. But God did not really want them to have meat. And then I started thinking to myself, but that's kind of weird because God actually set up the whole sacrificial system, the Levitical system, and the priests, well, first of all, forget about what the priests are doing. Once a year, at least once a year, it actually happened every day, but at least once a year, all the children of Israel would slaughter a lamb and grill the meat and eat the meat. Now you might say, oh, but they drain the blood. That's not the point. The point is we're not supposed to touch meat. It's supposed to actually give us impure thoughts and all kinds of things that Ellen White says it happens when you eat meat.
Yeah.
But they eat meat once a year at the very least. Christ himself, no doubt, because he kept the Passover too, probably did the same thing because, in fact, he was the one who instructed them to do it. God himself said, you will, at least once a year, you'll eat some meat by killing a lamb. Not only that, the priest's diet, to a large degree, consisted of the meat that they would get, and on a daily basis, there were sacrifices happening, and at the very least, if it wasn't the case, some they were vegetarian, which I doubt, but the fact of the matter is that the priests ate meat on a daily basis from the sacrifices that were made. And it wasn't because they said, I want to eat meat because I just feel like it. No, God actually said, that is what I'm giving you. You are going to eat meat. The children of Israel, from beginning to end, were a meat-eating people. There's no refuting it because the Bible tells you, and God was the one who told them to do it. So they must have had a lot of problems with impure thoughts for however many, for however long they were doing what they were doing. So not only that, they ate fish. We know that the disciples caught fish and ate fish. After his resurrection, Christ ate fish. He came into the upper room and they offered him fish and he ate fish to show them that he was still flesh and blood. And they gave him fish to eat and he ate fish with them in the upper room. After his resurrection and on the beach as well, he ate fish with the disciples. So where do we, and then of course you have the statements by Paul that salvation is not food and drink. That's not what it's about. He said, some of you are weak in the faith, might eat just vegetables, because that is actually what the Greek is saying. Well, good for you vegans. If that's what you want to do, then just eat vegetables. But Paul says that is not what salvation is about. Yet there is a whole doctrine and teaching in the Adventist church based on what Ellen White taught. And this is where we came to the conclusion that this is just plain wrong, that she taught that actually your salvation itself depends on whether you are drinking tea, coffee, eating meat, or eating cheese or eating eggs. So anybody, I'd love to have this debate with any Adventist who tells you that we should not eat meat because it's not found in the Bible. In fact, the Bible teaches something absolutely the opposite, historically and through what the Word of God itself tells you about what salvation is really all about. So that's one example.
Yeah, a very good example. And a lot of Adventists these days do eat meat. And I then also say, Well, didn't Ellen White have visions from God saying, don't eat meat? Where did that change? How come it's okay to eat meat now, but Ellen said no? It's just got so many
Some
red
of the
flags, doesn't it?
but some of the progressive truth that now has come to light.
Yeah.
But yet,
Tell us.
if you're not saved, then that's not progressive, because that statement puts it. No matter how long the world lasts, if you eat meat or flesh, you got to go to hell, because basically it was a salvation issue, and that sets it in stone for however long it lasts.
That's right. It becomes a salvation issue. Whereas when
That's
you
right.
look at it as you've stepped back, it's just reverse engineering. Or Jesus is coming any day. How do we get ready? We keep the commandments. We keep the Sabbath. We don't eat meat. It's all about preparing for this imminent return. Okay, so that was one. Can you think of another one that sort of raised its head? Maybe the Sabbath. How did you come to terms with Adventism? You definitely, even the progressives want to cling to the Sabbath. They say it's not a salvational issue. Well, therefore, Ellen White says it's a salvation issue. How do you deal with that? What thoughts did you go through when you were looking at the Sabbath and Ellen White's teachings on that?
So, for me personally, I do not believe that every single thing that the Adventist church teaches is not the truth. If the Bible is clear about something, then it's clear. The Bible in the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou do thy labor, all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. And it says to remember it, that he is the creator. I don't throw away truth. Just because I am no longer an Adventist and no longer am I associated with any denomination doesn't mean that I throw away truth. Now, people have to come up into their own conclusions and their own place with God and the Holy Spirit when they're reading the Bible. But there is like plenty of scriptural evidence for the Sabbath. I have never disregarded or thrown away the Sabbath in my own personal life. I think the Sabbath is a beautiful blessing, but how I interpret how the Sabbath is to be kept, that's a personal thing. It's a spiritual matter. It's a gift that God gave us to remember him. It's a relational issue between us and God. So for me, I haven't thrown away the Sabbath.
Yeah, and I would add to that and say that for those who have not seen the relevance of the Sabbath as perhaps we see it, I do not judge them either. That's the other side of the coin, because not everybody sees the light on certain issues either at the same time, or some people don't generally even get that. But my real core belief on issues of doctrine, especially ones that are not the core gospel doctrines, is that there are many churches who probably get a lot of things wrong. And there are probably a number of things we get wrong, and I've no doubt about that as well. So, but I'm convinced that God is not going to be looking at me and saying, and I agree with Cami, by the way, regarding the Sabbath, but I'm convinced that God's not going to be looking at everybody and saying, you didn't get that doctrine right, and so you're lost. So I think the core salvational things are the things that are the most important things to look at, and they must be in place, because that's I think which lies at the very foundation of the salvation question. Which
is, to me, one of the problems with Adventism is, statements that you just can't get around, like that, at some point, before Jesus returns, we're going to have to stand before God without a mediator. I mean, where in the world is that found in the Bible? Where is there one place where it says we will ever stand without a mediator, where we will ever stand without Jesus as our intercessor? That is nowhere to be found.
In fact, it is the core reason for being Adventism, to build a people, to prove at the end of time, in the time of trouble, Satan's claim that you can't keep the commandments wrong. To do that, you have to have a Jesus that is a person that could have was human, that could have sinned but didn't. He's your role model, not your sacrifice. They see him as, oh, he did it, so we can do it. They don't see that he was your substitute. And then that the very reason for being is that there will come a time you're seen as a righteous team is brought together, and Jesus says, right, you have the seal, but you're not sealed yet. There's one more thing you have to do. I'm going to remove my presence. Time of trouble is going to continue for a little short time. You have to stand and keep the commandments during this time without an intercessor. The whole reasons for Adventism's birth is to create this people that at the end of time will prove Satan wrong and vindicate God. So if you go, okay, I don't believe Jesus is ever going to leave as an intercessor, well, fine, you don't have to believe that, but that's the whole reason Adventism started.
Yeah, the one who vindicated God was Jesus Christ, and he's the one who we are not going to vindicate God in that God. God is. But yeah, it's a very scary doctrine, and that's one of the what I would call fear factor doctrines in Seventh-day Adventism. And it's kind of an outgrowth actually of the sanctuary doctrine.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the culmination. It's the crossing of the T's of that. And Angela Lima has pointed out, yes, Peter, you become your own savior in that regard.
Right.
The Christ isn't the atoning sacrifice or substitute. He has become the role model that at such a time you have to emulate. And right. the traditional Adventists say, oh yeah, but not on your own. It's Christ's garment placed over you. And in fact, one of the actual baptismal vows is inferring quite heavily, or implying, whichever the correct terminology is, that right. you have to have this embrace this indwelling so that you can actually follow the commandments of God. Right. So they just have this little kind of way of tweaking it. The reality is that Christ's garment is placed over you so that that's what God sees. It's not placed over you to have some magic little way of, oh, now I'm not going to sin and I'm getting this power from the Holy Spirit not to sin. But the whole point of Adventism is to say there will be a people that have to stand without an intercessor to prove to the angels and the other planets that what they're seeing is a bunch of people that aren't sinning. That's what it is, and it's wrong. It's unbiblical.
It is unbiblical.
You can't even progress away from that.
I personally can't stand for 1 second without being assured that Jesus is my intercessor. I am a sinner, and I can't afford that. So if I have to base it on my own goodness and my own merits, I'm going to be lost for sure.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous teaching.
Dangerous. Yeah. Stephen Jackson has just written, God doesn't need us to vindicate him. To think that God needs to be vindicated. If you're a progressive Adventist and don't agree with that, fine, but it's the reason. It's like being in a country music band that somehow morphed into Metallica, and just saying that no, we were never a country music band. No, they were just fools and idiots and didn't get it right. No, you're a different thing. Gospel Adventists, you're a different thing. You're not the same as Adventists. Embrace it. Hey, boy, I'm enjoying this conversation. And hopefully those that disagree are enjoying it too, because this is what it's all about, creating dialogue and stimulating that grey matter. I'm just looking at the book, and I want you to chat a little bit about Fanny Bolton. Chapter 7, I think, it talks about the Fanny Bolton story. I'm really interested in Fanny Bolton and Marion Davis. Share with us a bit about that.
Yeah. I'm actually going to open my book up to that spot as well.
It's actually one of the saddest parts of the book, I think. It's the saddest story about a person who was completely abused.
Yes.
Really?
Yes, yeah.
So the thing with Fanny Bolton was she was kind of, in a way, caught between a rock and a hard place. She was a very bright, educated girl. She had trained. She had gone to university, studied English, and she was recommended to Ellen White to be one of her editors. And when she came onto the team, she did a tremendously good job. And believe me, I've read some of the early writings of Ellen White and the way she writes without an editor, and she needed an editor. And Fanny Bolton helped her a lot. The problem started happening, and there's two sides. Ellen White's side of it is that Fanny Bolton was getting involved with this man, and that was kind of the. I don't say it was her excuse. I don't say it wasn't true. She was a human being. She might have done stuff that wasn't right. But the problem started when Fanny Bolton started telling people that Ellen White was getting her stuff from other authors. And that's where the problem started, because Ellen White didn't want people to know that she was getting her material from other authors. In fact, you read The Desire of Ages, and I'd recommend to anybody, read the book The White Lie by Walter Ray. Walter Ray writes a lot about Fanny Bolton as well in that whole story. But that is an excellent book, because that book shows you how many, in fact, post White Lie, Walter Ray discovered a whole lot of more things. In fact, there's so much in the books of Ellen White that were taken from other authors that you start wondering how much of it was actually, there it is. Yeah. How much of it was actually Ellen White at all, that she, I give examples, of course, in my book, how they very cleverly, edited it so that it wouldn't sound exactly like the original and so on. But that's where the problem came with Fanny Bolton. There were a few times Fanny Bolton left. Fanny Bolton, why she was caught between a rock and a hard place was because she really did believe that Ellen White was a prophet of God.
Yes.
She came to it with that belief. And she found, she eventually, you might remember if you read that part, she eventually came to the conclusion that maybe prophets in her position had a special sort of license to do certain things which other people didn't have to do. But then she was struggling with the whole thing of, but at the same time, why would you deny it? Because Ellen White was denying it. And so when this started becoming public and she started telling a few people about this and Ellen White got wind of that, then she started attacking Fanny Bolton about the relationships. It was character assassination, the same thing we were talking about earlier on. Instead of attacking the ball and saying, okay, I've done this, I have borrowed, she attacked Fanny Bolton and attacked her character. But then it got worse towards the end, because when Fanny Bolton left, she came back, and then finally, before Ellen White went to Australia, Fanny Bolton came back again. And Fanny Bolton went off, and at the harbour or wherever they were when they were leaving for Australia, her and Elder Starr and a few other people, in fact, went up and there was the bloody beefsteak story, because somebody pulled out a bloody beefsteak and Ellen White was telling them to make that. And then she happened to see Ellen White behind a curtain in this restaurant place eating, what was she eating? Oysters. She was eating raw oysters behind the curtain in this place. And of course, that really cut her, because she knew what Ellen White had said about meat eating, because she's the editor. She knew everything Ellen White had said about everything. And so that really, she couldn't understand that. And she spoke to somebody about that. And of course, Elder Starr, being the nice guy that he was, instead of telling the truth because he knew that it was true, he started defending Ellen White. And when Ellen White heard that she had done that, then she attacked Fanny Bolton outright. I think what happened at the end after they came back from Australia was that Fanny Bolton, still caught between a rock and a hard place, was Fanny Bolton had a problem because she still was struggling with this idea of the prophet of God and saying things, that if you read, for example, what they have, they call it Fanny Bolton's confession. And I've got that in the book as well. If you read Fanny Bolton's confession, and she was good with language and she was very clever about how she wrote, even though she wrote about her feelings, about how she felt about Ellen White, she never admitted that what she had said had been a lie, because it wasn't a lie. She never said that. Her main issue was that she was struggling with this idea of Ellen White being a prophet of God and her being able to maybe do certain things that other people were not, weren't really meant to do.
Ethical questions.
That was the ethical side of the issue, yeah. So But it was very unfair because Ellen White attacked Fanny Bolton as she rarely attacked anybody else. If you read the things she said about, and not only that, the things she said about Fanny Bolton regarding her character, and that were things that God directly apparently told her to say or showed her about what Fanny Bolton was about. Now, my personal feeling is that God never showed her anything about Fanny Bolton. She was trying to make somebody look bad because she was actually exposed as a plagiarist, and she didn't like that.
Sorry, my mic was off there. Do you think if Ellen White was the greatest apologist, was she duped, deluded, disingenuous, or dishonest? Would you go that far that she might have been dishonest, or do you think she was deluded?
It started out probably delusion and ended up dishonesty.
There are a few different theories that have been flying around about that with people who have been critics. One of them has to do with the fact that when she was a young girl, her dad was a hatter. And hatters in those days worked with mercury. This is a theory, and it might be true to some extent. Hatters worked with mercury, and Ellen White and the children, you can read about that in the history, is that they used to help her dad with the hat manufacturing and gloves. I think he made gloves as well. And that mercury was used, and mercury, of course, has a terrible effect on people and can mentally affect people. And there are some people who've had mercury poisoning to the point where they actually go into trances and have delusional experiences and things like that. That can happen. So now, whether that contributed to it or not, I'm not sure. It's possible that her early visions might have been the result of some of these, childhood things she was exposed to. But the other thing, of course, you remember the story when she was a girl coming back from school, that girl threw her with a rock in the face. And that did have a very powerful effect and definitely damaged her to a large extent. So whether that combined with the mercury and exposure that she had contributed to and her overactive imagination, where she would then go off into visions and have these experiences, well, I don't know whether that is true. So if it is that those were maybe some of the early causes for her so-called visions that she had, then I would say delusion became a part of it, because she was, or being duped, was that she really believed she was a prophet of God. But as things went by and then 1844 happened, I think that she gradually, or maybe even suddenly, how long that took, I don't know, she had to start manufacturing things. I know a lot of people refer, well, then how did she hold up that massive Bible when she was in vision and do all those amazing physical feats? Well, it's interesting that when you read, it was Elder Daniels, in fact, was the one who spoke about that at the conference they had regarding the spirit of prophecy in 1914, I think it was. I can't remember the exact date. But he made
1919.
Yeah, he said, I would not use any of those things as proofs for Ellen White's spiritual gift for the spirit of prophecy, because most of them were secondhand things. The fact that she didn't breathe, that she didn't do that, and that there was nothing really in those accounts that were absolutely substantiated, and they happened under circumstances that were very difficult to prove, whether it might have been a trick, of the light or something that you didn't see the breath on the mirror or whatever the case may be. So he was very skeptical about those actually being proofs. So I'm skeptical about that too, because and there are people who even can do amazing physical things if they are under some sort of trance state, and it doesn't have to be something that comes from God necessarily. So I would say that over time, this is my opinion, that over time she had to revert to blatant dishonesty in what she was doing. I can't find any other way, because if you're plagiarizing and you're hiding it from people, just that fact in and of itself, you're not in a trance, you're not receiving something, you're hiding something from people because you don't want them to know what you're doing. That tells me that already there's dishonesty going on there somewhere. So as time went by, I am sure that she had the meat eating issue. She was eating meat while she was castigating Tom, Dick, and Harry for eating meat and telling them they'd go to hell while she was eating it herself. So that's dishonesty. So if you are dishonest on that level with things like that, how much of what you are saying came from God is really true, and how much is not? It's a question which yeah, it's a question which everybody probably has to work out and answer for themselves. But it is disturbing, because how do you know what you can believe and what you can't believe?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not really important, and it's not really anybody's job to judge motives or even intentions, but it is our job to look at the fruits and then know them. You will know them by their fruits. And so that's what we judge. We don't judge whether a person will end up in heaven or hell, whether they repent or not. I don't even think I could do that about Judas. I think that's the judgment is for God to judge and be the judge. But as human beings, we have to look at evidence, and we have to look at facts, and we have to take away the emotion, and we have to take away the sentiments and all of the things that hold us to our churches or whatever it is. And we have to separate from those things, and we have to look at real evidence, real facts, and real truth, and we have to look at the Bible.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, those kinds of things become sideline debates about Ellen White, because the bottom line really is, it doesn't matter how she got the visions. It doesn't matter whether she was honest or whether she was deluded, because at the end of the day, if it's not according to the Bible, that's the bottom line.
Right.
So that separates from the tares right there. And I don't care how she got the visions. If it's not according to the Bible, it's not truth, and that's the bottom line.
I'll just when we were chatting there about Fanny, it reminded me, I did an interview last week with Sherilyn Kristen Clough, who's written a book called Uneat an Elephant, and it was totally unplanned to have a book about a similar topic, followed by your book, and in it she was chatting about Fanny Bolton and how she felt that Fanny, she'd read somewhere, had been slapped by Ellen White, and then sent me, and I just want to quickly read the paragraph where it looks like Ellen did slap her. And we're talking about this kind of mistreatment, and that's quite an emotional outburst to slap someone. But I'll just read it. It comes from, this is from John Harvey Kellogg to E.S. Ballinger, January 9, 1936, I guess. Were they both still alive at that point? Maybe.
Yeah.
So we can say these are people's iffy claims, and so I'm not saying this is Ellen White confessing this, and it was a long time after, but these are the kind of things that people were circulating. Fanny Bolt. So this is Kellogg writing to Ballinger, both who were severely booted out of the Adventist Church. Fanny Bolton was with her at the time. A year or two later, she returned to Battle Creek. She left Mrs. White, who incorporated in one of her books something she had herself written, and without giving credit. This is to Fanny. She said Mrs. White was in the habit of doing this, copying from various other books, so that she and Marianne Davis had to go over the material and transpose sentences and change paragraphs, and in otherwise endeavor to hide the piracy. Now, I've often wondered if Fanny knew that Ellen was doing that, and this kind of suggests she did know. She spoke to Mrs. White about it and objected to having her own manuscript used without credit. So it wasn't just a line or two, it was a manuscript that Mrs. White had put her own name to. Mrs. White was very angry and slapped her face. She mentioned the circumstances to one of the preachers and was forthwith dismissed from Mrs. White's employ and came back to America. Now, that might be a false story, but if we're talking about this Bible that Ellen White held up, an actual eyewitness that was there said she did hold a Bible up for a time, a minute or two, well within the realms of possibility. But by the time it got wheeled out as this Bible that was suddenly 40 pounds, it was in the eyewitness, it was more, I think, 18. I can't remember exactly. I did a whole episode on it, actually, and held up to prove that you could hold it up for a minute. Anyway, the point is that Loughborough is the one that spread this urban myth, and he'd taken it from his sister, I think. She told him, and the sister wasn't even there. She had heard it from someone else. There was no first-hand eyewitness, but instead the church will rally around the urban myth created by Loughborough instead of the lady, the eyewitness that was there and said, no, this is what happened.
Yeah.
It's like this kind of mysticism and idol worship of Ellen. She's like a rock star. She's the pop star of Adventism. And people do not, like you said, Cami, people are not making sound, rational decisions. They're making emotional filled decisions. Oh, we can't criticize Ellen because she's our idol. We kind of cut her so much slack.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's see. Let's look. Is there anything on there? Like I've been having interesting discussions with people about the 2,300 days and the SDA debate. You've written a whole chapter on that. If you just scan down your index, there is there one last one you'd like to just chat about before we say farewell for the day?
Yeah, let me look at the index. There's always something to talk about, but
yeah. And while Brian's looking there and Cami are having a look, everyone, I just want to mention to you, I'm interviewing Brian S. Neumann, and we're talking about his book, The White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. Cami also has written some great books. I'm going to look up that Spock one as soon as we've finished. What was the title of that again, Cami?
Oh, to be a Vulcan.
O or Ode?
Oh.
O to be a Vulcan. I'm going to look that one up and buy it. Now, those that would like to actually purchase a copy, I think I've got it still here. They can just go to your own Amazon account and search The White Elephant in Seventh-day Adventism. It's available on Kindle for only $5, and you can buy it for $20 as a paperback. I've got the paperback. It turns out the Kindle is working in Australia and other places. If it doesn't, if you have trouble downloading it, Brian and Cami are offering a free PDF download if you email cruxcreationsproductions@gmail.com, and I'll leave the address. You could get your own free copy today. And also want to really thank those who do support me each week via paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. I get a $50, sometimes $100, and it really helps keep the platform going. I put a lot of time into not necessarily preparing for my programs. I like to just go on the fly, but a lot of time into it, and a few dollars here and there really supports me. So thank you for that. And I'll just quickly bring up a QR code. Some people like to scan a QR code. And so I'm going to hand it back to Brian and Cami, and just pick one of your index topics there, and we'll close in sharing one more exchange on Ellen White there.
Yeah, as it turns out, of course, the bottom line in the whole thing about Ellen White is that Ellen White or the Word. Now, this chapter, which I titled "The Word or White," what is it that we're going to follow? And I decided, when I was writing this chapter, I decided to look at, in the Adventist Church, what some of the thought leaders and ministers and Bible scholars said about Ellen White and her authority. And I'd like to share with you, because you see, this is the traditional Adventist view, and it comes from some of the leading lights in Adventism. For example, I don't know if anybody remembers Elder Cleveland. He was at one time the Associate Secretarial Ministry of the General Conference. This is what his statement was. He said, "I believe in the testimonies. Mrs. White's writings are the world's only inspired Bible commentary. They constitute the most serious challenge to Christian living," that's obviously health reform in there too, "that has come to the church since John's Patmos revelations." And then, of course, not so much anymore, but from time to time, these kinds of statements come up in the SDA Bible Quarterly. And this particular one stated that the Bible and the writings of Ellen White are inerrant. So there you see this way. And again, we are not talking about the Gospel Adventists now. We're talking about the conservative traditional Adventists. But that is what the feeling was, is that Ellen White is placed on a level with Scripture even insofar as inerrancy is concerned.
Yeah.
I've just one or two other ones that are really interesting. Robert Pearson, and I find this kind of ironic, especially when I started studying the Bible afterwards myself.
And he was president, wasn't he, before Neil Wilson?
Yeah, he was one-time General Conference president of the SDA Church. He said, no excuses are made for her contributions. I speak these words after nearly 40 years of denominational service. Her writings help us understand the Bible. So this is where this whole thing happened, where you are actually ending up interpreting the Bible through the lens of Ellen White, rather than letting the Bible show you whether Ellen White is actually right, or using the Bible as your, in other words. They are using the Bible, Ellen White, as the lens for interpreting the Bible. And here's another one. I'll share one more. Our position, and again, this is from the Review and Herald, by the way, our position on the testimonies, Ellen White's writings, is like the keystone to an arch. Take that out, and then there is no logical stopping place till all the special truths of a message are gone. Nothing is surer than this, that the message and the visions of Ellen White belong together and stand or fall together. And on the basis of what we have discussed tonight and what is revealed in the sanctuary doctrine and all these things, that keystone to the arch has been removed, and they have all fallen together. And that is the bottom line. If ever there was another prophet to arise in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, this is an interesting thought question maybe to round things off with. If ever there was another prophet, by what standard would that prophet be tested?
Yes.
That's not a trick question either.
Yeah.
Because if Ellen White was a true prophet of God, if there was a new prophet that ever had to come into the church and claim to be a prophet of God, then the standard, by the very definition of what Adventists have been doing with Ellen White and how they've used it together with Scripture, they would have to be, that prophet would have to be a vegan eating, all the things that Ellen White condemned, dress reformed, everything else. They would have to conform to every single one of those criteria. But the problem that arises, though, is this, that you could not have a prophet in Adventism that could not be tested by the standards Ellen White has set. In other words, you would not be able to test that prophet by the Bible and the Bible alone. So Adventists, that's why there will never be another prophet in Adventism. Because there is no person in Seventh-day Adventism who would actually be able to withstand that test. And unfortunately, the reason for it is not because Ellen White set a standard which was such a wonderful high standard, but she set an unrealistic standard for Adventists, for Bible-keeping people, and hence a prophet, if ever one should come, that is impossible for anyone to. So anybody would end up being a false prophet, because they would have to be tested not only by the Bible, and by the way, they tested Ellen White according to the claim by the Bible criteria. You know, she her lips didn't move, and all these things, and her eyes were wide open, and everything. Her husband would go and hold the mirror to see if he. So their claim, though, because all those tests can be refuted, but the claim was she was tested by the Bible. But now that she's been tested by the Bible and come up with all these other things after the fact, it's done for anybody else who ever wants to be a prophet, because they will not be able to be tested by the Bible and the Bible alone.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the Gospel Adventist, with all the claims of, well, we do have the Bible first and Jesus first, and we don't follow those things, need to be fully aware that in many ways the teacher in the Adventist Church that they respect and brought assurance of salvation, Des Ford, that they rally around and support, Robert Pearson that you mentioned, and Neil Wilson that took over from him, had a meeting. I think I've talked about it in my interview with Lyndon Rogers, Dr. Lyndon Rogers, in season 2, I think we talk about a letter that was found between them, that they needed to draw a line in the sand, that Des Ford was questioning the authority of Ellen White, and this could not happen. And then Glacier View happened. Neil Wilson presided over it, and Robert Pearson couldn't make it because of health, but he sent a letter there to say to all the delegates, you know, this is where I stand on this. And we know what happened next. So the progressive Adventist who admires Des Ford needs to realize that the administration, from Neil Wilson to his son Ted Wilson, and many administrators right back to when A.G. Daniels and Prescott talked about this at 1919. We need to kind of show the real Ellen White, you know, and the consensus was that, well, the people aren't ready for this. They need to admit that the administrators are working hard to maintain the position of Ellen White's authority right up there as always. So if they are speaking of change and Jesus first, great. If you can find that nestled somewhere within Adventism, enjoy it, embrace it. But you have to be honest and say there's some major issues here with Ellen White's teachings that go against the Bible. You cannot put her up on a pedestal. You can say she's got a gift, but how far do you take that? Sorry, Cami.
I was just going to say, I'd like to ask the question, when did just being a Christian not be enough?
Exactly.
Why is it not enough to just be a Christian? You know, I don't understand. Why do we have to be in a certain denomination? Why do we have to label ourselves? Why do we have to humanize all these things? You know, God, he didn't create denominations.
It's like, there is nothing that Ellen White brings to the table of Christianity that is unique in any way. You know, like why go through the journey to the gospel and understanding the saving nature of Christ's message and have to kind of go through the quagmire and the maze and all this confusion and stuff, when, like you say, Cami, just go to the source. There you go. Why do you need, like, people say, oh, she pointed back to that. Well, not very clearly. She didn't point back to it very clearly. Oh, she led me to really understand the Bible. Well, really? As she copied from other authors, and Marion Davis and Fanny Bolton prettied it up. Just go to that Bible. And why do you need all of the Ellen White confusion?
Yes. Right. Why? And do we not have enough of a brain ourselves that God gave us that we can't read? Do we not have enough of our own ability to reach out to God? It's almost like, you know, my family, my background is actually Catholic. That's what my mom's whole entire family is, Catholic. I don't really find, I mean, we became converted into the Adventist church when I was young through Revelation seminars. But honestly, when I look back on it all, I don't really see that much difference between Catholics and Adventists. They both think that they are the only true church. They both have you know, like the Catholics have the Pope, you know, and Adventists have Ellen White. Ellen White is the Pope. You know, I don't get it. I don't know why we need.
She speaks ex cathedra.
Yes, I don't.
Everybody got to listen.
I don't know why we have to have all of these people to tell us what God has taken the time so eloquently to tell us himself in his word.
Yeah. And maybe I'd just say one last thing about about Wilson and Pearson and all those guys. They realized, and that's that statement I read earlier on about in that convention that in 1914 in 2014, where they spoke about Adventists being the only church, was the problem is that if you read in Revelation, where it says that God's end time people are those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. If you are going to lose Ellen White, then you don't have the testimony of Jesus Christ anymore, according to Adventists, of course. That's not what it's about. The spirit of prophecy, the testimony of Jesus Christ. So they had to come to a point where they decided, well, look, if we are going to say that we're going to, you know, suppress Ellen White or sideline her in some other way, we are actually sacrificing one of the major characteristics that define who we are as a people. We are the only people who keep the commandments of God. and have the testimony of Jesus Christ and the spirit of prophecy. If we are going to lose the spirit of prophecy or the testimony of Jesus Christ, well, then we have lost the very essential thing that distinguishes us from all the other churches in the world. They almost had no choice. They had to make that decision. We can't do away with Ellen White or try and adapt it in some other way. And that's why those brethren still are standing very firm on Ellen White, because they know that when they do that, they have to admit to the rest of the world and the Adventist world as well that we are not actually who we said we originally were.
Yes. Wow, that's good. Yeah. Yes, you have to say, yes, boy, that's good. You're not saying, oh, those traditional Adventists are a lunatic fringe, they've got it wrong. You have to say, just say that again. We
So,
have to admit
yeah,
we are not who we originally claimed we were.
to admit, if we do that, that we are not who we claimed we originally were.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a really good point to.
Then you are not who you say you are. Then.
That's right.
And that's a terrible thing to do to yourself.
Yes, yes. You can't go, oh, shock, horror. What last generation theology? How did that happen? You have to go, we admit that we are not who we originally claimed to be.
That's right.
That's brilliant.
And then you would lose all your members you'd lose thousands in a day.
That's why the administrators don't want to water down Ellen White's authority.
That's right.
I've got to write that down. Can you say that again? I'm going to write it down in the quotes here, so it's on our screen.
If the brethren have to admit that Ellen White is not the spirit of prophecy, the testimony of Jesus Christ, the spirit of prophecy, as they have defined, and she herself in the book of Revelation that she is, if they have to say she is not that anymore, then they have basically denied, or they have to then admit in the same breath that we are not who we originally said we were.
Yeah.
It didn't come out the same way, but that's essentially what
that's
it
good. Yeah. And people will be able to listen to that, but I'm just bringing that up because I want to remember that and come back to it. The Gospel Adventist essentially has to admit, got a little spelling mistake there. Sorry, viewers, if I was editing this, I'd edit out all the gaps. But where they have to admit that we are not who we originally claimed to be.
Yeah. And the day you do that, you've got to say, well, then what church am I belonging to?
Yeah.
And then run that church.
Yeah, what am I if I'm not that? You know?
Yeah. And I think that the Gospel Adventist has been duped to think that, oh, no. The church was never that. Ellen White was never that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it was, we've progressed from that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to admit that claim that was originally made was wrong.
That's right.
Truth always has a way of coming to the surface.
Yeah.
And what has happened, and God has shown it. I mean, I think he put it out there with Walter Ray's book, and there were a lot of people who took that book seriously. I think he tried to get the attention through Desmond Ford, and that there's a problem with this sanctuary doctrine. I mean, he's been trying to reach out because he loves the Adventist people like he loves everybody else. And he's trying to give them opportunity. Come to me, he says, for my burden is light. You know, that's what Jesus says. The burdens of all these do's and don'ts,
Extra
religion,
doctrines.
extra stuff that you have to do that you cannot back up from with the Bible. You know, Jesus said that his load is light and easy.
That's what he said to the priests and Pharisees. You weigh people down, you tie them down.
Yes. Yeah. That's great, Cami. The light and easy, the path to following the teachings of Jesus is life abundant, light and easy. It's not rocket science.
And yet it's narrow. And yet it's narrow because look at the Christian world. How many people will just be like, hey, I'm a Christian and I'm not going to judge you based on your denomination. Most of the Christian world belongs to some denomination because they're separating themselves somehow. They're being separated. And Satan likes to do that. He likes to separate. He doesn't want the whole entire Christian world to just go, hey, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And you're a Christian. And we're all on the same page here. Like we are believers in Jesus Christ and the gospel message. And all these other things are kind of things that we're all sort of figuring out, but they're not salvational issues. So we don't have to fight about those things. We don't have to argue about disputable matters like Paul tells us not to do. We can take the essence of salvation and we can be Christians. We don't have to be all these separated denominations.
That's right.
How ironic that the Adventist church is trying to tease apart and be a remnant that is separate, and then
Right.
within themselves is split,
Yes.
demonstrably split in two.
Oh, big
Yeah,
groups.
there's little subgroups and nuanced elements to that, but it's demonstrably split in two.
That's right.
Yeah, Jesus is in the business of saving. He's not in the business of trying to keep as many people out as possible. And that's the kind of religion that so many people are in, and not just Adventists, not just Adventists.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the gospel shouldn't be confusing. Adventism is confusing. Every Adventist I interview, and this is why they claim that we're the real Adventist, we're all real Adventists. Yeah, and every single one that I interview has a different view of what it is. And when I push certain points, it becomes confusing.
Right.
Yes.
There are very few Adventists who I've interviewed that have a clear statement of what they believe. I believe Des Ford had a very clear statement. I did an interview with him. It's called the 11-Minute Gospel. It's clear, concise.
Right.
I had Wilf Pascoe, Pastor Wilf Pascoe. We've done an interview with him on sanctification. Wow, so clear, really beautiful. I've interviewed people even like Stephen Beagles has a clear understanding, but I would just suggest that that is not Adventism.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I've really loved our conversation today. Boy, there's been some pearls and gems in those oysters that we've been working through.
Absolutely.
It's great. We will definitely do it again. I just want to quickly announce I do have a guest for tomorrow. I've been inviting people in my list there, and I'm really pleased to announce that tomorrow, Australia time 11:30 Thursday, US time, we'll call it Pacific time. I won't go through all the times, but Pacific time 6:30 p.m. Wednesday evening. Rodrigo Custodio, who has the channel or the Facebook group Para Que Posamos. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I can't wait to chat to Rodrigo. I met Rodrigo when I was at Loma Linda in February, and we had some great conversations. So I'm looking forward to that. That's a spontaneous last minute. So we'll have Rodrigo tomorrow. Any last words in closing? A lot of people say, hey, we want to hear the gospel from the people you chat to. Don't just talk about all the nitty gritty. Maybe just share something, both of you. What's the good news of the gospel for you guys, and how does it inspire you every day?
Yeah. Well, I'll let Cami have the last word. So let me say, the good news of the gospel for me is that, first of all, I recognize that I'm a sinner, and that I, on a daily basis, fall short of where I should be. That's not a secret, and I'd love to be better than I am, but I'm thankful that my salvation, my assurance is based in Jesus Christ. He has done it for me. He died on the cross of Calvary, and if I am covered by his blood, there is nothing in this world, not even myself and my own failings and shortcomings, that I need to fear. Because if I come to him and put that on him, then I am saved by his grace. And for me, that is the most tremendous assurance, because we are all stuck in this, journey that we're on here on planet Earth. And we need to realize that, as Cami made the point earlier on, that the gospel is simple and that Jesus' burden is not a heavy burden to carry. He has given us something which is absolutely doable, not because we're good, but because he has done it for us.
Everybody knows John 3:16, but I love John 3:17. For Christ came not into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. To me, that is the essence of the gospel.
Yeah.
Well, that's a brilliant place to leave it for today. Thank you so much for your time. I've had a stimulating, wonderful conversation. And those watching, let's
Thank you, Peter.
end up some love hearts and likes, and thank Brian and Cami Neumann. I've just spelled Neumann wrong. I'm going to bring that up and correct that. I don't know how I'm going to blame auto correct there. We were chatting off air that that I have a microphone. There's a famous German-made microphone called the Neumann microphone, and yeah, Brian and Cami Neumann, thank you so much for your time. Go and check them out on Amazon. Both have some great books. I'm about to go and buy right now the "Oh to Be a Vulcan" that Cami has written. And I'm going to be flipping through this incredible book, The White Elephant, Brian S. Neumann. So I can't wait to do that this afternoon. And until tomorrow, everyone, have a brilliant evening or morning, or those in the UK, hope you're still resting and sleeping well. And we'll see you all again next time.
God bless.
God bless. Thanks so much, Peter. Thank you.